anything. I'm Tim Packer, and we're doing this live for a couple of reasons, mainly to celebrate the launch of my new book, You Can Sell Your Art. I'm thrilled to say that we launched the book just over a week ago. It's already hit #1 bestseller on Amazon in several different categories. And we've gotten over 20 qualified reviews from people who have bought the book, and they're all 5-star reviews and kind of over the top. And so, yeah, so to celebrate that and to kind of give back, I want to do this free live for everybody out there, whether you bought my book or not, and answer questions. So let me just go over a little bit of how this is going to work. Oh, I should also mention about the book. If you, for anybody that sees this, so we're doing this live, but we're also going to be posting this as a YouTube video. Our launch is ending on Sunday at midnight. And once that happens, then the book reverts to its regular pricing. So right now the ebook is just $2.99 and the paperback is $9.99 US. But during the launch week, you can get some amazing bonuses. I'm giving away for free my online course, Creating Your Plan for Success. And that's a course that we used to sell for $199 on its own. It's now part of my Unstoppable Artist bundle. And you'll also get one more live free Zoom call with me, but that will be on Zoom. So for anyone that buys the book before launch, they'll get the free course. They'll also get a live call with me on Zoom. And the great thing about the Zoom call is that you will be able to share your screen with me. I can critique your work. You can come on camera. We can actually have conversations back and forth. So right now we're doing this on Riverside on YouTube. So if you have questions, you'll have to type them into the chat, and then I will answer them. But this is our very first time using Riverside too. So we're trying to keep it as simple as possible. We're just broadcasting on YouTube, and we're just dealing through the chat. And so I've got some notes here that, I just want to mention too, how you claim your bonuses. So a number of people have been asking me because they buy the book, but they don't get any email from me or anything, because when you just buy the book through Amazon, I don't get notified who bought the book or any of that stuff. But if you go to the back of the book, at the very back, there's a bonuses page, and that has a website URL on there for your book bonuses. So, and that is only going to be in the book until Sunday. We're changing it on Monday. It'll be a different URL, and there'll be some bonuses, but you won't be getting like $300 worth of bonuses like you will if you buy before Sunday. So that's what you need to do. And we're going to leave that landing page for the book bonuses open until February 7th. So even if you buy the book on Sunday night, you'll still have 2 weeks to read the book, and then go claim your bonuses from that page. But okay, so someone's asking, is this digital or physical? Because they're from Argentina. Either one. So you can buy the book as on Amazon Kindle as an ebook, or you can buy the paperback. But both of them have the bonuses page. Now it won't have a live link to the landing page. You'll have to actually just copy out the URL, put that into your browser window, and then that will take you to the bonuses page. And then you'll just enter your name and your email, and that will allow you then to sign into the Tim Packer Art Academy. That'll create an account for you where you'll get those things for free. So just that's important that, I'm not going to send you an email with a link or anything for the bonuses. You have to go to the back of the book, use that page, and you need to do it by February 7th when we're going to be taking it down. Okay. Now, so any questions you have about the development of your art, the business of being an artist, about mindset, anything at all about art, about should you go to university, any of that kind of stuff, I'm here to answer. And I've got 26 years of experience, having a very successful career, having done pretty much everything, but also having made pretty much every mistake that's possible. So ideally, you guys don't have to make the same mistakes that I did, and can kind of advance on that career path much faster than I did. Okay, so I have some people have sent me questions in, either through comments on the posts or on YouTube comments or DMs or whatever. So I'm going to go through with a couple of these. So if you guys have very specific questions, again, put them into the chat. My son Cameron is hosting the meeting, so I've got him in my ear on the phone, and he'll be putting them up for me to answer. But let me just go through a couple first that came in, because these ones are really going to set the tone for kind of everything that comes after, and specifically what it is that I talk about when it comes to art. So this is a question, actually a comment someone put on one of my posts that said, art should be about making art, not about making money. And so I want to deal with that because I hear that a lot. And my first answer to that is, well, that's a choice. I don't like it when anybody says art should be anything, right? Art could be whatever you want it to be. And if art is not about making money, then it's just a hobby. And it can be a wonderful hobby. But I really, really dislike the idea out there that somehow by turning it into a business or a profession, you're somehow selling out or denigrating the art. And it kills me because that only happens in art, right? We don't do that with athletes or in music or in film, writing, cuisine, whatever it is, any other sort of avocation. The people that do it at the top of their game are expected to get paid and expect to get paid well. And I don't see any reason why it should be different for visual arts, whether you're a painter, a sculptor, it doesn't matter, right? So the idea, and that's one of those myths about art too that you hear a lot, that, you know, artists should suffer. Like there's nothing noble about suffering. And people often bring up the Vincent van Gogh example. And again, there was nothing noble about that. His life was so miserable that he killed himself. That's not someone who we should emulate. But I also do like the idea too that it wasn't very long after his death, once the world saw his art, that the world fell in love with it. And I have to believe that had he not suffered so much, had he been able to keep going on, he would have reached a point where the world did appreciate his art, and he would have gone on to have a very good living. But yeah, there's nothing noble about suffering, and there's nothing kind of wrong with making a very good living from whatever it is you're doing. And if you do it at the very top of your game, I think you should expect to make a very good living. And then we get into the question of, well, why would you want to become a professional artist? And there's really only one reason. And that's that, and it's the reason I decided I wanted to become a professional artist. And that's the reason that more than anything else in the world, I wanted to be able to get up every day and just create art. Well, there's only three ways that I know of that you can do that. One of them is to marry a wealthy spouse who's very supportive of you and just says, you go create your stuff and you don't have to worry about selling. That's fine. Another thing is to win the lottery. And it's like, yeah, you don't need to worry. But the only other way to be able to go into your studio every day and give your prime focus to your art is if you can actually pay your bills by doing it. And so, like, yeah, if you're looking to get rich and get rich quick, art is not a way to go. There's an awful lot better ways to make a very good living. But if you want more than anything else to be able to get up every day and go in your studio and focus on doing the thing you love, then for most of us, the only way you can actually spend your life doing that is being able to actually earn a living from your art. And ideally, too, you want to reach your full potential as an artist during the course of your life. Well, it only makes sense. If you're able to get up every day and spend 5 or 6 hours painting, you're going to get much better than if you have to do a full-time job and you're just painting in your spare time. So that's kind of my talk there about, again, that art should just be about the art and not about making money. And then finally, I'm going to talk about the art villages because that's important, because everything that I talk about when it comes to art has to do with the specific village that I live in. So this is the idea that there's no one art world. There's a bunch of different art villages within the art world. There's the one dominated by postmodernism, right? That's what's taught in a lot of universities. That's what's in a lot of publicly funded galleries. That's where what's important there is not the public's reaction to the work. It's how the artist felt. It's conceptual work, right? That's where you go. That's the meat dress. That's Marcel Duchamp's Fountain. That's the exhibition in England not long ago of invisible works of art, right? That's one whole village over there, and that village, kind of the gatekeepers are art critics, curators from museums, that type of thing, and the people who actually spend the money there are large institutions or grant bodies. That's not the village that I'm in, but that's the village that gets confused an awful lot between the village that I'm in. I'm in the village of what I call commercial sales, and that is the village of real people buying art from artists that they're either going to hang in their home or hang in their place of business, right? And they usually do that through art festivals, through commercial art galleries, which are galleries that make their money by selling art, online, directly from the artist, but it's real people buying real art to hang in their homes. Now, the thing about this village that's important is, who are the gatekeepers here? It's the public. The public decides who succeeds and who struggles. And despite over the last 50 years, a lot of the educational institutions and governing bodies and that really pushing postmodernism and all that kind of stuff over there in that village, every study that they've done shows that the vast majority of people still appreciate and value the things that have been important in art since the Enlightenment. Things like skill, things like craft, things like emotional connection with the viewer. And to do that, to create work that they appreciate, you need to master things like drawing, like composition, like technical brushwork, all of that kind of stuff. So that's the village that I live in. And people exercise their right to vote about who succeeds by getting out their wallets and buying an artist's work. And so that is the village that I live in. Everything that I talk about art is about that village. It's not to do with the village of postmodernism or public galleries or grant bodies or anything like that. It's about creating work that you love. And here's the key there too, because yes, we do need to sell our work, but that does not mean we need to sell out. It is possible to find that confluence where you are creating work where you absolutely love the process. The way that I paint now, I love painting that way more than anything I've ever done. And I've done everything in my career. But not only do you love the process, you love and are proud of the finished work. And this is crucial. Enough of the public loves the finished work. But the only love that counts here is getting out their wallets and actually giving you money to take your work home. Saying, I love your work, it does not count as the public loving your work. And to put it into kind of context, I have friends of mine who play the guitar and sing, and we're sitting around the fire and they're playing and they're singing. It's like, wow, I love your performance. Would I pay $200 to go see it in a stadium? Absolutely not. Right. So, and I'm just gonna, Cameron, do we have any questions coming in yet? Okay, so I'm just going to deal with one more question first that has to do with this, and then we'll go to the live. And we're going to deal with the lives first. And if we run out, I've got a bunch that people sent in, but if we don't get to those, I'll deal with those because we're going to do another live on Sunday as well. So that whole idea of, you need to have people love the work. And I recently had someone who sent me a question. They said, well, people always tell me they love my work, but they aren't even willing to pay the cost of the materials. And so he's like, you're wrong. Just because people love your work doesn't mean they're going to buy it. And so let me kind of dissect this first. So think about that. The cost of the materials. Like I create a 24 by 24 painting for me probably has about $50 or $60 worth of materials between the canvas and the paint. I sell that for $2,500. So I'm able to sell my work for 50 times what the cost of the materials are. So if people are saying they love your work, but they're not even willing to pay that amount for it, one of two things is happening. Either they're just being kind to you. Or it's like me with my friend who plays the guitar. They love it, but they don't love it enough to pay for it, and they need to love it enough to pay for it. Or, and this could be the thing, you're just showing it to the wrong audience. I mean, the second follow-up question from that is, well, who is saying they love your work? Because it might just be your friends and family, which is fine. And then the next question is, well, has any of your friends and family ever bought a piece of art? Because not everybody values art enough to pay for it, or especially not original art. So, like, if the answer then is, well, no, I'm showing it just to, the people that are saying that have never bought a piece of art in their life. It's like, well, then that's the problem, right? It's like if you are going to an outdoor show about fishing and you're exhibiting a Lamborghini, everybody's going to say, I love the car, but they're not people who are going to buy a Lamborghini. So one of the keys is you need to get your work in front of a qualified audience, and that is people who actually value art enough. And ideally, when we're kind of starting out as artists, they value original art enough to actually buy from artists and hang it in their home or in their office. And so if you're getting in front of those people and they say, I love it, but they're not willing to pay the cost of materials, then you can take it. Well, they don't love it enough. People throw the word love around. But I've seen people love work enough where, for my work, I've had people come to a show and say, well, we're not interested in buying. We're not in a position to buy. We just really love your work. We come to see. And then they have a conversation. You can tell it's a difficult conversation, and they're making and this has happened to me a number of times, they're making the decision to forego the vacation they were planning on to buy a piece of my art. So if people love your art enough, they will pay for it, and they will sacrifice to do it. And that's the kind of love I'm talking about. You need to engender that type of love, not from everybody, but just from enough people. Okay. And with that, Cameron, let's go to the first live question. Can you put it on the screen for me? Okay. So this is from Brockwood Cottage Studio. I'm a felt artist. How do I protect my energy, keep my positive mindset around family members that offer little interest or encouragement? And Cameron, can you, for the next one, you can adjust how long it stays up? That one only came up for a few seconds, although I got enough of that. Okay. That is really, really important, because as any of you who've already read my book know, the very first chapter in my book is mindset. And mindset is the idea. Henry Ford, actually, it's funny because they're actually using this now on a Ford commercial, but they're not saying Henry Ford is the guy that said this. They said someone once said that whether you believe you can or cannot do something, you are absolutely right. Right? And so that is the whole idea of mindset. The very first thing you need to do if you are interested in making a living as an artist or in anything is, first of all, choose to believe that you can do it. If you have negative thoughts like, well, the world doesn't appreciate art and artists can't make a living and it's all a big game, and unless you have the right contacts, you can't do it. Or the big one that I was under the apprehension of, I'm not talented enough. If you believe all that stuff, then you'll be right. You will not be able to be successful. So mindset is an actual choice, right? All of those things I just mentioned there are what's called a fixed mindset. And that's a philosophy that says we are born with a certain amount of skills and innate kind of competencies, and that's it. Some people get sprinkled with magic dust and they go on to become, world famous singers, artists, whatever, but the rest of us didn't get the gift, so we can't achieve that. That's what I believed when I quit my dream of becoming an artist and joined the Toronto Police Force, because I made the decision that I wasn't talented enough. And I was absolutely right. But I would have been more right if I had added the word yet. I wasn't talented enough yet, because talent is not something that you either have or don't have. It's not a gift that magically falls on people. What we call talent, and this is in any field, it's the sum total of your skills, knowledge, experience, and creativity. And you can improve all of those dramatically over time, and your ultimate talent is virtually unlimited. And so the first thing about mindset is having to understand that, and then it's a choice. You make that choice about This is what I believe. Now, that can be difficult, right? Because you're fighting against all of the other stuff that comes against you of people of a fixed mindset and people saying, well, you can't make a living doing this or whatever. But here's something that you'll find helpful is that studies have shown that the average person's mindset, everybody, I say, everyone's mindset is very close to the average mindset of the 5 people they spend the most time with. So if you are spending a lot of time with people who are negative, people who are in the fixed mindset, people who have very limiting beliefs, then that is going to chip away at your desire to keep this mindset of the growth mindset and everything being possible. And the way that you combat that is spending time with people who have a growth mindset, and not only who have a growth mindset, but people ideally who have gone on to actually do it, right? So someone like me, I don't not only believe in the growth mindset, but I've actually gone and done it. And I have to tell you too, when I first heard this idea of the growth mindset, I didn't really believe it. And it was Harley Brown, who was a Canadian artist that, in an interview with him, he said, if you want to become successful as an artist, I 100% guarantee you can do it. It's just all about hard work. Unfortunately, Harley Brown didn't give the other thing that's necessary as a plan. You need to have a plan to get there. And that's why I wrote the book. But I didn't believe it at first. But a little voice in the back of my head said, what if he's right? What if I'm just not talented enough yet? What if I could become talented enough? And then I thought, well, I'll do an experiment. I'm going to assume for 1 year that it is true. And I'm going to live my life as though I believe it. And so that meant I started scheduling my art like 3 times a week. I painted, regardless of whatever else was going on. I started looking at the things that I knew I was not good at. And the number one, which you may find this hard to believe if you've taken any of my courses, was composition. I was probably the least competent artist intuitively when it came to composition. I had no idea about composition. But I thought, well, let me start working on that. And now I teach composition, and people have said my composition course is kind of the most comprehensive one they've ever seen. So, I mean, not only do I believe in the growth mindset, but I've done it. I've gone on to have a successful career, create a successful art academy and all that. And so you need to spend time with people like this. And then here's the greatest thing is studies have shown even what we're doing now, or even if you're watching this on YouTube, that has the same impact as if you were sitting in the room with a person. So that's what I would suggest you do. So 2 things, the people who are very negative about you and about your art, you can do 2 things. You can have a conversation with them and just tell them, this is very, very important to me. And your negative comments are really, really hurting me and hurting my chance of success. And if you're not going to support me, then I would at least appreciate it if you weren't trying to drag me down. And if they don't do that, then you need to potentially limit the amount of time you have with them. And then whatever time you do have available, right? Rather than watching Game of Thrones or any of the other stuff that's out there, spend time, find people on YouTube who have the growth mindset, who have actually been very successful, and watch their content. Listen to podcasts. Podcasts are a great way because often they're interviewing people who are successful, but that's what you need to do to combat the negative influences, and you need to cultivate the positive influences. And another thing that you can do, I'd recommend for anybody, search out if you have a local art society or art guild that you can join where you can actually physically associate with other artists. But anyways, that's the answer to that. You guys may have already figured out. You may have some short questions. I don't have very many short answers. Okay, Cam, what's next? Do you have any strategies for selling art in a local cafe? Should pricing reflect the cafe location, or is it mainly about exposure? Okay, that's actually a really good question because initially when we're starting out, it's like we're looking for places, any place that will sell our work. Um, and I had work in a hospital. I had work in an insurance office. I had work in a cafe. Initially, what we're trying to do, and I'm assuming at this stage, then you're kind of early in your career and you're just starting to sell. And what I would say, my pricing strategy at the start of any artist's career is to price your work as low as possible. And so the first thing, but again, like what does that mean, right? How do you determine, should it be $100, $500, $1,000? What's low? The best thing to do is investigate other artists in your area who are out there who are selling, whether they're selling at art festivals, whether they're selling at cafes, whatever. If there are other artists selling at the cafe, the best strategy when you're starting out is to be the best value in your class, right? Because when people are out looking at art, if they go to an art festival, or even if they're in the cafe, if there's 4 or 5 artists who are showing in the cafe, if they're all of about the same quality and the people have decided they're going to buy a piece of art, unless there's one artist that they absolutely love more than anyone else, or one painting that they love more than anything else, they're going to look for the best value, which means if they have $500 to spend and these artists over here are selling 30 by 30s for 500 and this artist is selling his 3 foot by 4 foot for $500, they're going to go for the best value, which is the cheapest price kind of per square inch, per foot, whatever. And so when you're starting out, I really recommend you do that, because you're better off to sell a lot of work at lower prices than try to squeeze the last nickel out of your work and potentially sell nothing at all or sell very little. Because what happens is, well, first of all, the work that you're doing early on is not going to be your masterpieces. And the work that you're doing early on has a very, well, depending on how fast you improve, it could have a very short shelf life. What I mean by that is work that you do this year that does not sell may not hold up to the work that you're doing next year. And so then you can't exhibit it because it just hurts your brand to show it. So what you want to do is have work sell as quickly as possible. But keeping in mind, this is not the plan. It's not like you're going to be selling works like at this price down the road. But what you want to do is have as many sales as possible early on. But that also creates a buzz. So nothing sells like sales. So picture, for example, in this cafe, you've got your work priced very aggressively to move. People that come into the cafe will see that, wow, this artist's work is selling. Well, what does that tell them? That tells them, wow, people really value this artist's work. And then ideally what happens too is if your prices are below what the public perceives as a good value and you're selling a lot, then the demand for your work goes up. And then when you can no longer kind of service the demand, the only way to slow it down is to start raising your prices. So by doing that, you will eventually get to the high prices, but you will have sold all of that developmental work along the way till you find your ultimate voice. But if you start off with high prices, you could be sitting there next year with no sales in a basement full of work. So I always recommend kind of, first of all, investigate the pricing of other artists that you would consider at a similar level of in terms of the desirability of the art as well as their career, and then price it under them so you are the best value. And the other thing I should mention, this only applies if they're selling. If they all have their work priced at whatever and nobody's selling, then their work is priced too high, at least for the market that they're showing it in. So I hope that helps. What do we got next, Cam? Is there any other time I can send you my paintings that I'm very proud of besides when you go on Zoom? Love your book. Yeah, unfortunately not. I've got about 100,000 followers on social media right now. So if I just allowed people to if I just accepted work to critique, I would never have time to paint, teach, or anything else. So if you do the live Zoom call, if you buy the book, then you'll get an invite to the live Zoom call where you can do that. And then the only other way is I actually have on my Art Academy, there's what I call my Hungry Artist community, but that's basically my mastermind group. And that's where people in that community get all of the courses that I do, as well as long as they're members of the community, they keep getting all the new courses I do. But the important thing there is I do a weekly Zoom call that's live with the members of the community where they share their work and I give critiques. But I charge for that because I have to make a living at this, right? And when I made the decision to switch from painting to teaching as my main focus, the only way that worked was if I actually can earn a living doing it. And so that's why I have the Art Academy. But no, unfortunately, I cannot just critique work that you send me because I'd never have time to do anything else. So you can do it with the live Zoom calls that come here. And I also should say too, anytime you buy one of my courses, you also get an invite to a live Zoom call. So if you buy the book during the launch, you'll get an invite to one live Zoom call. And I'll even say for that, even if you can't make the meeting, so it'll be one call at a specific time, you could email me a piece of your work then, and I will do the critique on the live Zoom call. But yeah, you can get a live Zoom call with me three ways. I guess buying the book and then claiming the bonuses. Buying any one of my courses, you'll get invited to a live Zoom call as a bonus with any one of those, or joining my Hungry Artist community. And that community is $449 a year Canadian, which is actually a pretty sweet deal to have access to me every week plus get all my courses. So anyways, that's that. What do we have next, Cam? I have my first exhibition in a gallery that takes 45% commission. I've priced my new work accordingly. Does that price then define the value of pieces before and after the exhibition? That's a really, really good question. So I'm assuming here that you also have been selling work outside of the commercial gallery structure, and it probably has been at a lower price. And when you say you've priced it appropriately, you've priced it to allow for the 45% gallery commission. And I would just mention to people out there, any of you who kind of don't know and think, oh my God, that's a lot. The typical gallery charges between 40 and 50% commission. So that's actually pretty typical. In a really good gallery, it's worth it because they will sell a lot of your art, which will allow you to just create your work. Not only that, they have access to high-end clients. And if your work does very well in the gallery, then they will get your prices to a much higher level than probably you could get them on your own. So the question that I would say is you have to do kind of after the gallery show. And it depends if this is just a one-time show and then your work's coming out, or if your work is going to stay there for a while. Because there's two potential scenarios here. If your work has been selling at a certain price and now you've raised it to go into the gallery may actually sell your work at that price and sell well. And then if you decide, yes, I want to stay with that gallery, and yes, I want to investigate other galleries, then that price becomes the price of your work, because no gallery will support you and show your work if you're selling a 24 by 24 for $1,000 in their gallery and then you're selling it for $500 at a festival, because they're like, why would anyone buy from us, right? Because they can go to your festival. You're just using, it's actually called gallery shopping. The galleries have a term for that, where for artists that do that, like they send people into the gallery to see the work and see it at that price, and then the person contacts the artist directly and buys it at a discount. So the gallery is just being used to promote private sales of the artist's work. So if you want to continue doing both, selling in a gallery, potentially doing art festivals, selling to private clients and all that, then your price should be the price. And you'll need to make the decision after the show. If the gallery doesn't sell any of your work, then it's like, why would you want to be there? The only reason to be in a gallery is because they can sell a lot of your work. And there's another thing that has to do with galleries. A lot of artists think, I thought too, when I first got into a gallery, oh my God, hallelujah, I'm in a professional gallery, a commercial gallery. I didn't sell anything. And maybe I remember my very first solo show, I sold one little watercolor painting. And that's because of something called the Pareto distribution, which says that in any group of people, a small percentage of that group are going to be responsible for the majority of the output or the sales, and often the square root. You may also have heard it as the 80-20 or 20-80 factor. But what that really means is if you're in a gallery and you're one of 36 artists, the top 6 artists will sell as much work as the other 30 artists combined. So there's a lot of artists in galleries that are part of that bottom 30 that are not really doing very well. They're only selling 1 or 2 or 3 paintings or whatever. And then there's the artists at the top that are selling as fast as they can paint. And so I would say that until you get your art to the point where you can crack that Pareto distribution, where you're one of the top sellers in a gallery, it's not really worth it to have your work just sitting in a gallery, not moving, but then making you raise your prices potentially beyond what people at art festivals or whatever are or privately are willing to pay. So I would say that what you need to do is, yes, go in with these prices. And after the show, then you need to do an assessment. If you sold a lot of work, then it's like, wow, okay, I can get this kind of prices for my works in galleries. Then you're going to charge that at the festivals. But if you can't get those prices at the galleries, you're certainly not going to get them at festivals. And at that point, you might be better off. I found for me, I didn't really do well in galleries until I was already killing it on the festival circuit, because I developed my art to the point where I couldn't keep up with the demand and my prices were just rising, because of the fact that my work was getting better, my audience was getting bigger, and I couldn't keep up with it. And the other thing I would say is, once you get into a gallery, they're quite likely going to want to pigeonhole you into whatever you're doing now. And if that's not selling well now, that's not going to sell well 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20 years from now. But in the meantime, they're kind of limiting you from exploring other things. So I would say, like, by all means, go do the gallery, because maybe your work's already at that place, in which case it could be a hallelujah moment and your life changes and your career changes. But anyways, I would say put the work in the gallery at that price, and then afterwards, then you need to make the assessment. Okay, Cam, what do we got next here? Okay, I am retired, have been self-taught in acrylics. How do you get started to monetize my artwork? What's the best process or place to start? That's a great question. And that's for all of us, right? How do we start selling our work? So I offer, there's three paths that I really believe are the best way to get started, right? So one of them is to see if there is a local art society, art guild, whatever, where you live. And for the most part, most communities do have their little local art society, and they often will have like an annual member sale where, whether you get to put a few paintings in there or whether you get like a little booth space, whatever. But that's often a really great way to start, because and not only that, by joining your local art guild or association, there will be a number of people in there who are at various states. Some of them will just be hobbyists, but some of them will be people who maybe are already fairly accomplished in terms of selling their work, and others will be just starting out. And you'll also be able, so you may get the opportunity, just by being a member, to just put a few of your paintings in their annual show up for sale. But the other thing that you will learn, because the other thing I recommend are art festivals. So these are basically where it's just a pay as you play kind of thing, right? It might be $50, $100, $150, whether it's to rent booth space. Often these are like out in parks, and you actually get a 10 by 10 space, and then you need to get the 10 by 10 artist tent, the big white tents, and you're responsible for kind of exhibiting your work and everything else like that. But the good thing about those two things is they do all the promotion of it, right? With the local art show, you just bring your works, and they probably look after sales and everything else. If you do festivals, you're kind of responsible for a lot of the stuff. You might be responsible for the point of sale, in which case you need something like Square, where you can just plug it into your phone and use that to swipe credit cards, etc. But you have the expense of having to get a tent and all that other kind of stuff. The other way that's really great, a lot of communities, if there's an active art association, they'll do a studio tour. And what that will be is they'll be like the governing body, the art committee or whatever, or sometimes it's even run through like the municipality just as a cultural thing. They'll run a studio tour where it might be over a weekend, over a couple weekends, where basically you pay your $50 or $100 or whatever to be part of the tour, but they do all the promotion, and you just set up a space in your home or in your studio, right? You can do it in your garage, you can do it in your living room, whatever, where you have your work for sale, and people go on the tour and will drop by to your house and maybe buy your work, maybe not. So those are the ones that are done where a lot of it is coordinated outside. I did those starting out, but when I was starting out, what I found to be the most successful was, for me, I did my own studio open house. And basically what I did is I invited all of my friends, family, coworkers, and all of their friends, family, coworkers, whatever, who had any interest in art. And I turned the main floor of my house into my art gallery. and we had people come in and we served wine and I had my work for sale and we did very well. That very first festival, now mind you, my work was priced extremely, extremely low. I think I sold like 30 paintings and I only made like $2,000. So you can imagine how much I was selling for. But the good thing is is I was starting to develop clients and I was selling my work and it made me feel like an artist. Fast forward to just before, I guess around 2017, 18, I actually opened my own commercial gallery. But up until then, I was still doing my studio open houses. But by that time, it had grown to the point where we were doing $50,000 in sales out of my house. I had people driving 3, 4 hours to come to my studio open house. We had the whole main floor with originals, the whole basement with the Giclée reproductions, and we did $50,000 in sales over the course of the weekend. And so that's what that can turn into. The thing I like about the studio open house is you are totally in charge of everything, right? And you think of it, people go, oh, yeah, you're having people come into your house. It's just like, well, when you go to sell your house, you have people coming into your house. When you have an open house, same sort of thing. And I would start off initially just with inviting people. Towards the end, though, I was promoting it on social media. I didn't care if I knew people. It's like, if you want to come buy my art, you can come in my house. And so that's another one. I actually have a YouTube video out there about how to plan your open house. So if you search that, you'll find that. But those are the ways I'd start off because at the beginning, you want as many opportunities as possible, and you want it at kind of a low threshold. You don't want to do. I was in the Toronto Art Expo, which was the show that changed my life, where I did $28,000 in sales. Well, that was like a $5,000 fee to go and exhibit there. Well, I'd already been selling $2,000, $4,000, $5,000 at smaller art festivals. So I had this track record and I had people encouraging me saying, yeah, you need to get in front of a big audience. And it was great for me. I had the two people next to me. This was their very first art festival they'd ever done. And they spent $5,000 and didn't sell a single painting. Cost them a lot of money. It also just, their self-esteem took a bashing, their mindset, everything else. So you want to start out small and then gradually, as you have success, move up and up and up. But those are the things I'd recommend initially. Your own studio open house, studio tour, art festivals, or if your local art guild has an annual show. Those are great ways to start. And then you get to feel, you get your work in front of an audience and find out whether they like it enough to buy it and how much they're willing to spend on it. Okay, Cam, what's next? Should my art have a style or a theme? Oh, that's a great question. So the answer is ideally, eventually, yes. But does your art need to have a style or a theme when you're starting out, or particularly when you're on that journey? The answer is absolutely not. And again, I can go from my experience here. So I was a high realism portrait painter when I left the Toronto Police Force. I was elected as a senior signature member of the Canadian Institute of Portrait Artists. I was elected to the Canadian Society of Painters of Watercolor. I thought I was going to make my living painting portraits. And what I discovered within a couple of years was I loved painting people the way I wanted to paint them. I hated painting other people's people the way they wanted me to paint them. It reached a point, again, it's like, well, we want my son doing this, and we want my daughter doing this, and we want the dog here, and we want, there were paintings that I never wanted to paint, and I would rather have root canal than go in and complete another commission. And then I realized, oh my God, what have I done? I need to find a way to paint that I love painting where people love it. And so then I went on this journey of trying to find my voice. And I tried everything. And so I was all over the map when I made this decision. I was spending half my time doing portraits and the other half in what I now know is process mode, where I was just trying things, right? Trying things to see how they turned out. And at that point, I was painting figurative works. I was painting landscapes. I was painting still lifes. I was painting abstracts. I was painting in acrylic, painting in watercolor, painting in oil, painting in casein. I tried collage. I tried everything. Now, at the same time, I was really, really focused on mastering composition and mastering the skills kind of that go with creating art, drawing skill, and brushwork and all of that kind of stuff. So that everything that I created, it was still pretty good because I had a very good composition and it demonstrated skill while I was doing it, but my work was all over the map. People would come into my booth and they would say, "Did you do all of this?" And I said, "Yeah." They'd be like, "Wow, looks like there's a work of a dozen different artists here." And I would just say, "Yeah, like I'm trying to find my voice." And during this process, I had so many well meaning people, both artists as well as clients and potential clients, come up to me and say, "Tim, you would probably do much better if you just picked one thing, one style, one sort of approach, one subject matter, one medium, and kind of focused on that." And I just knew that that wasn't the case, because here's the thing: while I was still doing very well and I was still selling, I would say, better than most of the artists at the festival, I wasn't doing over the top crazy good. And I just knew that there was nothing that I had done yet that got that, "Oh my God, I have to have this reaction." Like I just wasn't there yet. And so I just kept pushing and pushing and pushing and trying different things. And then I created a painting called Forest Window. I don't know, Cameron, if you have the ability. This is our first time doing Riverside, but he might. You're not going to do it, or you can? He can't. Okay. But if you go on, you can see my YouTube video about this too. But I created a painting called Forest Window. It was the very first painting I did with the sun coming through the trees. And it was like I was in flow state. Like this painting just seemed almost to paint itself. I loved the process of creating that piece more than anything I'd ever done. I loved the painting. And then the question is, well, what's the public going to think? So I took it to the next art festival that I did. It was one of about 30 paintings that I had in my tent. It was a 36 by 36. It sold as soon as the gates opened. A couple walked by, immediately went to it, bought it, and then said to me, "Well, we just got here and we don't want to lug this around. Can we leave it? We'll pay you now. Can we leave it here and we'll come back and pick it up?" And I said, "Sure, that's fine." And what happened over the course of that festival, in the next half hour, I could have sold that painting 20 times. Everybody that came into my tent just went, "Oh my God, I love it." And it was like, "Oh, sorry, it's sold. Sorry, it's sold." And they were so disappointed, they would just leave. They wouldn't even look at my other stuff. So finally I thought, well, this is killing my chances of selling anything else. So I took it down off the wall and wrapped it up so that people couldn't see it. But then I thought, okay, well, that reaction, I'd never had a style or a subject or a particular thing that had that reaction. I thought maybe that's the thing. And so I went home and I was participating in a charity auction at the Burlington Center for the Arts, where it was a black tie auction. So a good audience, where 50% went to the art center, 50% went to the artists. So I did two more paintings kind of into what you would now recognize as my style, right? And one of them didn't even have the sun coming through the trees, just had the same sort of the approach to the painting. Well, I got a call the next day from someone who was on the board of the art center. Two things. She told me both my works had sold and they were in a bidding war where they both sold for double what I was asking for paintings at that size. And not only that, she wanted to know if she could commission a piece in that style from me at the price that I had listed as the regular retail, which I did. And then I put my head down for 2 months and just painted that subject, that style, took that to the Toronto Art Expo, and then that's where I did $28,000 in sales over the course of like a 4-day festival. So the thing is, until or unless you are creating work where people go, "Oh my God, I have to have this," then you are not there yet. So you need to find that. You don't want to settle on a style or a theme where it's like, yeah, where you're known as, yeah, that's the artist that paints in this style that's kind of moderately appealing, that they sell 1 or 2 paintings every festival. So that's the short answer. But I would not recommend anybody to pick a style or theme just to pick it and then hope to kind of run that. The public, as I said, in this village decides. So it's like, I advise everybody to spend as much time as possible exploring, learning, growing, because every time you do that, you're getting better and better and better. And then when you find that particular style, the public will not be shy about telling you. I've seen it happen to a number of artist friends of mine, and I've seen it happen to a number of people in my academy. Once you find that thing where you love it, you love the work, and the public loves it, the response will be overwhelming. And then at that point, it's like, yes, that now becomes your style, at least for as long as you still love doing it. Okay, who's next, Cam? Okay, get my glasses on. So I would love to hear about galleries that charge the artist a subscription instead of selling the artworks, and how to get out of these galleries and get into a legit one. Yeah, exactly. So what we're talking about here is something that's called a vanity gallery. That's where you pay the gallery for the ability to hang your work in their space. Those galleries make their money off artist subscription fees. They do not make, or most of them don't even care about selling your work. There was one particular gallery I used to get it. I've reached out from them every year. They're right down in, I think, Chelsea in New York, and they give, oh, we love your work. We'd love to offer you a show, and then they have a link to their packages. For 5,000 you get this. For 2,000 you get this. Those are those are businesses that are making their money from charging artists to show their work. Often you will just, it's basically just a storefront with like some track lighting and maybe like walls that you hang on. Those are not legitimate galleries, and they have no interest in selling your work. And not only that, even if they do sell some of your work, anybody who knows the art business knows these galleries. And so even having that on your resume that you had a solo show at whatever, if they see it's one of these galleries, it's like, oh yeah, never mind. um, and how do you get into legitimate galleries? um, the best way to get into legitimate galleries, and the one thing we're going to talk about here, I'm all about the business of art, but the business always comes second. The art always comes first. So the best way to get into galleries is to work, to master the skills, master the concepts, really push your creativity to the point where you are consistently creating work that people love and want to get out their wallets and buy. When you can do that, galleries will want to show your work. A lot of artists think, well, if I could just get my work into a gallery, they'd sell. It's like, no, no. And a lot of galleries have a lot of artists who hardly sell anything at all. Again, remember that Pareto distribution. And so the best way to get into galleries is to actually work on your art and work on your business on your own, whether that's, again, everything I mentioned, right? Studio open houses, studio tours, festivals, that type of thing. And because there's a buzz that happens when someone starts becoming very successful, right? When I did that show at the Toronto Art Expo, not only did I do almost 30,000 in sales over the course of the weekend, I had the business cards of 10 gallery owners who approached me and asked me if I'd be willing to show with them. And I started showing in galleries then. I still did festivals for probably another 3 or 4 years. Literally every single festival I went to, I had gallery owners approaching me and ask if I would consider showing with them, because every festival I went to, I sold a lot of work and they could see that. And what do gallery owners want? They want artists who people want to buy their work. So it's not like, oh, get into a gallery and you'll start selling. It's like, start selling, start creating work, first of all, that gets that reaction from people, that biblical reaction of coveting where they have to have it. And once you develop a kind of reputation for having an audience and having people want to buy your work, then a gallery is going to be interested in you. But very few galleries are interested in taking someone who's not selling any work, and it's like, well, we're gonna promote that person and sell it, because the question is, why isn't the artist selling their work, right? If you're not selling work at art festivals, you're almost certainly not going to sell work at galleries, and they're going to take a piece of the pie. So that's what I would say. And again, in my book, I go into that, right? Like, how you go about kind of improving your work and developing that unique voice. If we don't get a question about that soon, I'll actually go into that. But I really want to get to people's individual questions. Okay, Cam, what's next? Do you make money selling art, selling books, teaching art, or online content creation? Can someone really make a living only from selling art? Yeah. Okay. Okay. So that's a good question, because right now I'm making from everything, right? But I'll tell you one thing: the most money I've ever made in a year is around $280,000, and that was before I started my YouTube channel, trying to help artists kind of for free, before I started my art academy, before I decided I want to be an author. I wanted to be an author. I was routinely making over $200,000 a year just from the sale of my art. And for a number of years, that was Well, initially it was selling at art festivals and then galleries, so a combination of art festivals and galleries. And then eventually what happened is one of my galleries, Koyman Galleries, which is Canada's kind of premier art gallery, Terry Koyman said to me, he said, Tim, if you want to keep doing art festivals, that's fine, but you have to consider two things. We're only getting the work that doesn't sell, which was true because I was taking my art to the art festival, and then what didn't sell, I would send to the galleries. But he said, we're only getting your stuff that doesn't sell. You'll never know what we could do from you if you just sent us everything, including the best pieces, and let us have first dibs. And then he said, and we can also, I think, get your work to a higher price if you're just selling exclusively in galleries than if you are selling at art festivals too. So I thought, well, okay, well, let's give it a whirl. I'll give it a try. And so for that year, I cut out all the art festivals and I just sold at galleries. And that year, I sold more work than I'd ever sold before. That was at that point my highest earnings. And it made sense because I was spending all of my time then painting. I wasn't spending time kind of, going to art festivals, preparing for art festivals, all of that kind of stuff. And then it reached the point where I'll tell you the story. So it was 2015. That was the year that I made the most money I've ever made, and that was strictly on the sale of my art. So that was the sale of my originals and the sale of my Giclée prints, and that was exclusively through galleries as well as my one studio open house a year. And that was what I made too. That wasn't the gross sales. That was what I made. And I had a show down at Yorkville in Toronto in the Ritzy area, and this was like the television movie kind of, experience of an artist having a show. This was one of the top galleries in Toronto, and what they had done is the official opening was happening at 7 o'clock in the evening. So the gallery was open during the day. They closed at 5. And then around 6 o'clock, I set up in the front window of the gallery, right on the main street in the kind of ritzy area in Toronto, and I was working on a painting for the hour leading up to the show. And while that was happening, I could see people lining up. And by the time the show opened, it was literally lined up down the block. People rushed in, and again, I still think about this. There was a guy playing guitar, like live music. There was waiters walking around with trays of wine, and red dots were just going up everywhere as people were it becomes almost like a feeding frenzy. Once a few red dots go up, and if people want to buy, they're thinking, oh, geez, I better get in here. And I was just sitting there kind of basking in the glow, just thinking, oh my God, like this was the dream. And I never, ever thought it would get this big. And I realized I'm going to make over $250,000 this year from the sale of my art because I'd already had a very good year. And then what happened is I had another feeling kind of come over me. At first, I thought I was feeling guilty because I know there's a lot of artists out there kind of starving, that would love to do this and that are struggling, but they just can't. But I realized it wasn't that. What came over me was responsibility. That's what I felt. I felt a real responsibility to share what I had learned at that point over a 15-year career as a full-time artist because I was not gifted. I was not in any of my art classes the best person in the class. I was always around like the 70th percentile. There were always people in my classes who were more naturally talented than I was at that stage. And I knew that I had got here by doing certain things. So at that point, I decided I owed it to karma. I'm a big believer in karma is practical. So I thought I owed it to give back to art, which had given me so much, to start sharing everything I had learned. So that the next day, I literally went out and dropped $25,000 in film and audio equipment because I decided I'm going to start my YouTube channel and I'm going to start giving away my content for free. There was no thought of monetizing it at all at that point. And I just started my YouTube channel. And of course, what did that mean? That meant there was like 8 hours a week that I was no longer painting. I was working on my YouTube channel and then doing social media to promote my YouTube channel. And so the next year I didn't make as much money. But again, I just felt so much that I needed to give back to art, to help the artists that had the same dream as me, that eventually I realized, long story, you can read all about it in the book, but eventually I mentored Brooke Cormier, who some of you may know. She went on to make 30 grand in her first year as an artist. by year 2, she was selling her work internationally and doing prints. And she also was not gifted. She wasn't even as talented as I was when I left the police force, when I started mentoring her. And so after me coaching her and seeing her success, after some life-threatening kind of illnesses that I got through, I decided I can't do this anymore just as a side passion thing. I want to do it full time. And to be able to do that, I need to make money at it. And so to answer your question, I'm hoping this year that we make more than $280,000, but I've never made that amount yet. Because again, I walked away from the thing that I was making the most money at, which was painting. Because for the first 3 years while we were really pushing the Art Academy, I only painted maybe 10% as much as what I used to. But if I can paint full time, I can make a couple $100,000 off the sale of my work, just from my art. And that's hopefully what we're doing now. So now, just to break it down to you, what did we do last year in the Art Academy? Cameron, was it about $130,000 from the Art Academy? So we did. Right now, the majority of my earnings for the last couple of years have been from the Art Academy. But again, I haven't been painting, but we still have been selling our prints and things like that. This year, I've been painting. I've actually painted more in the last 3 months than I've probably painted in the last 3 years. And so we're starting to get the originals going. We also have our weekly newsletter that we do to people with selling the giclées. And now we have the book sales. So again, it fluctuates from me. But it's been, multiple 6 figures or multiple 6 figures kind of every year, kind of, going back. I'm thinking eventually the Art Academy could even go beyond that because it's scalable, right? It's a digital product. If somebody buys one of my courses, I don't have to do anything. Same with the book. If someone buys the book, Amazon processes it. But for a painting, and here's something too I'll talk about. I do remember one year though, when I was painting, I was making about $100,000 gallery sales of originals and about $100,000 of sales of giclées in each year, and that would kind of vary. But I was making over 100,000 in each, whether it be gallery sales, because also once I got involved in social media, then we started dealing a lot of selling direct to clients. But there were a number of years where it would be a toss up. It might make 120 in originals and 100 in giclées, or vice versa. Now we're at the point where the Art Academy is bringing in about $120,000 a year, and that's with no advertising either, or very little. It's all being driven mainly by social media. So that's something now that it's taken us 5 years to get it to that stage. Now I'm back painting almost every day, and now we have the book out as well, and we also have the reproductions. So yeah, ask me in 2 years, but right now it's about probably 60% of the Art Academy, maybe 30% originals, and maybe 20% giclée, something like that right now. But the book is doing really well, and who knows? But the one thing I will say, it is important, if you want to have a stable income coming in, to have multiple streams of income, right? But here's the deal. That only works once you're creating a product that is very successful, right? So don't go out and do prints and critique and all this other stuff if nobody's buying your art. But I didn't engage in any of this stuff until I'd already become very successful as just an artist, a painter. Then you can, bringing in multiple streams of income, not only will increase your overall earnings, but it will actually even things out. Like during COVID, this is crazy. We had one of our bonus years during COVID, even though people couldn't go out. But part of that was because I had the prints that I could sell. I also, when I went through the year of the thyroid from hell, 2019, I really couldn't paint that much, but we still had my gallery. But we were just selling prints, and we sold a ton of prints. So having multiple streams is good, but don't go doing prints and everything else until you're creating the work that gets that, oh my God, I love it reaction. Short answer to the question, yes, it is possible to make a great living from just your art. If I had never made the decision that I want to help other artists, I'm going to start a YouTube channel, all that, I would have made a lot more money up until now than I've made now. Now, going forward, that may change because the teaching and that is all scalable. But doing the teaching, writing the book, all of that stuff has taken away from my ability to earn the absolute maximum right now. So I hope that answers that. Okay, what's next? Do you prep the canvas? Should I use gesso? Well, I prep my canvas. Typically, if you're going to buy a canvas from like an art supply store and it's white, it's already coated with gesso. And that should be fine to paint on unless you're buying like really, really cheap canvases. So I would say that, yeah, when you buy a canvas, it's prepped with gesso, and gesso is just the ground that they put over the canvas to accept the paint, and so that the paint adheres, and it's also archival, so it's not going to yellow or anything else like that. So if you buy an already gessoed canvas, it should be fine to paint, especially if it's from one of the big art manufacturers. I then coat my canvas with red acrylic paint for the most part. I recently did a piece on kind of a golden colored canvas, but I typically work on a canvas that I've toned with fluid acrylic into a kind of like a deep red or burgundy. But that's specific to the way I paint and the way I like to paint. But if you buy a canvas that has gesso on it, it should be fine to paint on. I make really good realistic art, but I live in India and we don't really have an art buying culture. Even very senior artists are not able to sell consistently. They teach to survive. How do I sell? Well, you got me there, right? Because here's what's key. You need to get your art in front of a qualified audience. And what I mean by a qualified audience, that is people who appreciate art enough to get out their wallets and buy it, right? So if you there's no way of you getting your art in front of those people, then you have kind of a conundrum, which might be like, I live in Jamaica, but I want to be a downhill skier, and there's no ski hills here. It's like, I don't know, I can't help you, right? So there are two things: potentially social media, right? Because you can now ship work all over the world. I know that Brooke, so if you don't know Brooke Cormier, the young artist that I mentored, she sells everything that she paints, and sells it internationally through social media. And same with Emily Valentine, who's another artist from my academy. That she doesn't sell galleries, she doesn't do art festivals, she doesn't do anything. Her work all just sells now online from her website, and she sells internationally. So that would be the only other option I would say. You have two. You could possibly relocate. I don't know if that's possible, feasible, whatever. But it's kind of like someone says, I want to be an actor, but I live in, the North Pole. It's like, well, you might have to move to LA. You might have to move to Toronto if you want to be an actor, because you need to be where acting jobs are. And same with here. You might need to relocate, or the other option is you can create an audience on social media that you can then ship your work to those people. Now, it's not easy, but it's possible. And it depends on two things. It depends on the quality of your work, and it depends on the quality of the posts that you do. But that would be the only option, I would say, because other than moving from where you are, because if you can't get your work in front of qualified buyers, it's like saying, I sell luxury cars, but nobody in my community will spend over $1,000 on a car. How can I sell them cars? And the answer is you can't, right? That's the end of it. So, I mean, those are your two options. And if you're going to go into social media, what I would say is follow artists on social media who have huge followings and who also sell their work on social media. Objectively, really kind of judge your work next to theirs, right? Is it as good? Because that's the thing. People often think that their competition is their local people or whatever. No, your competition's everyone. If you're trying to sell your work, your competition's me. Someone's going to decide to buy your work instead of my work. Or even if your prices are lower, they need to decide to buy your original instead of one of my prints. And so it's like your competition is kind of everyone. So I would say for everyone, the main thing is to get that work to that highest level possible. But then if you're going to be doing social media, look what other artists are doing who are very successful on social media, and then try and find a couple types of posts that you can do that are kind of repeatable, that become almost the sawdust of your working process, so that every time you create a painting, okay, well, I've got several pieces to do. Like you guys may have seen me with my silly reveals on there, right? It's silly, whatever, but it works. We've had people sell, what's our shortest camera? We had one painting sold within 2 minutes of a post going live, I think. But I do that for every painting. I do the reveal. I also do the reveal where As I do the reveal, then it goes into a 30-second or 40-second thing of jump cuts of me painting the actual painting, right? And so, but to do that, I need to have my phone focused on my canvas every time I paint. And then now I'm doing for the book, I'm doing me kind of just talking about a specific chapter while it's showing me painting. It's like you need to find things that's like, okay, now I just need to keep doing that, right? Like I'm going to do that till every chapter's done. There's 38 posts, right? Rather than trying to think, what am I going to do a post about today? So that's what I would say. But at the end of the day, we're all somewhat limited by where we are and the art markets we have kind of access to. But the internet now means you have access to everyone, everywhere, but then the work needs to be absolutely frigging amazing, absolutely unique, and then you also need to produce amazing content that gets people actually watching it and stopping the scroll to do it. So that's it. I can't tell you how to manufacture clients out of a place where people just don't appreciate art. And it might be, in fact, that then you need to make the majority of your living off teaching. And hey, that's not bad. That's what I've been doing for the last few years. Okay, what's next? I've noticed it for writers today. Writing seems to be the least of what they do. To be successful, they must spend most of their time marketing. Is that true for artists? Not really. I know it's important. There's a season to a career, right? So at the beginning of a career, then yes, you're spending an awful lot of time, first of all, just trying to get your work in front of people for two things. Obviously, you want to be developing clients and people who buy your work, but you're also getting that feedback about, do people love this, right, that you're doing? Because again, there's no point trying to make a career if people just kind of like your work. You know, the village of starving artists is full of where people like their work. You need to develop the skills and all that stuff I talked about. Spend time in process mode, push your creativity until you create your own unique voice that people go absolutely gaga over. Once you do that, you don't need to do any marketing. The only reason I started doing YouTube is I felt an obligation to share what I'd learned. And then the only reason I started doing Facebook and Instagram was because my YouTube channel wasn't growing fast enough and I thought if I just put it out there, people will come. Well, that wasn't the case. Then I discovered Gary Vaynerchuk and it's like, oh, I need to promote my channel. So all of the social media stuff that I started, that was not to sell my art. I was selling faster than I could paint, just servicing the galleries that I was in. I was in about 10 or 11, maybe 12 galleries across Canada and the US. I could never keep up with the demand for my work. And that's when I was making a couple $100,000 a year just from my art. I could have gone and never done a single bit of marketing in my life, not joined social media, and would have made more money than I've made now. But the only thing I wouldn't have had the opportunity to do, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to impact artists and change their lives, a number of whom now have very successful careers because I made that decision. And to me, that's more important to me now than just cranking out work and selling more paintings. But in the initial stages, yes, it's important to do whatever it takes to get your work in front of people. But once you find that voice that again, that people absolutely love, then it's relatively easy to get into galleries, and then you don't need to do anything because the galleries look after all of that. And it is the same sort of thing with marketing books as well. I'm pretty sure J.K. Rowling is not spending most of her time marketing, right? She's a brand. She's become a brand now, so that every time she puts out a book, it's going to do amazing. But in beginning authors, indie authors like me, it's like, yeah, you need to spend a lot of time marketing. We have spent the last 4 months doing a lot of marketing on YouTube, particularly about the upcoming launch of the book. If you've seen any of my social media lately, it's been a lot about the book, but that's because I'm a brand new author. And so, yeah, and you just need to know that. Now, ideally, at a certain point, here's the nice thing about writing, but as well as painting, if sales go really well, then Amazon starts actually pushing it out there, and it's already happening. I think we've hit #1 in 3 or 4 different categories already in Amazon. And what Amazon wants to do is sell books. So they're going to put books in front of people that people have bought and have reviewed and given very good reviews. And it's the same sort of thing with art. You know, while you're starting out, you're going to be responsible for most of your marketing. And it's not only just to sell your work, but again, it's finding, because again, that third key thing to making a good living from your art is work that people love. The only way you know that is by getting it in front of them. And so the more your work you get out there, even if you're not selling, you can at least be getting feedback. Oh, they seem to like this type of work that I do, or this subject matter, or this stylistic approach. So maybe I'll dig a little deeper. But yeah, short answer to the question, once you're successful, you don't need to do any marketing. I sometimes rue the day that I decided I need to go out and do a YouTube channel and help other artists, because my life was really sweet. I just went down, I just had to get myself into my studio for 4 hours a day, 5 or 6 days a week, and I would make a couple $100,000 a year from the sale of my art. And I would literally have gallery owners come into my house to pick up work so they could get first dibs on it. So definitely possible to make a really good living from your art. And I know a lot of artist friends of mine that's all they do. They just sell the work. I also know artists who make a very good living teaching, kind of not what I'm doing, the online teaching, but traveling around North America or even to Europe teaching workshops. That can also be a very lucrative thing. And it really ultimately depends on what is it you want to do most. And for me, it was like, you know, I'd achieved the amount of success I'd wanted as an artist. And for me, it's really important now to help other people achieve that same kind of dream life. That makes me feel really good. Okay, next cam. What's the most popular framing mounting option that sells? Oh, that's a really good question. And actually, one of the questions that I had, that someone actually emailed me, was about framing. So here's my thoughts on framing. I love working on canvas, and in particular on the gallery wrapped canvases, right? So those are the ones that are like 1 3/4 or 2 inches thick. And here's why. When I was initially doing the art festivals, I was doing a lot of watercolors as well. And here's what I didn't like about painting in watercolor back then, is everything had to be framed, right? So that meant you had to cut the mats for it, then you had to frame it. But not only that, the watercolors were delicate. If they appeared in the sun, then you got condensation on the back of the glass, which could ruin the mat. It means you had to reframe everything. If the wind blew and it fell, the frame got dinged up, you'd have to reframe it. Or the client, this happened all the time, I love that painting, but could you put it in another frame for me? And of course, they don't expect to pay anymore for that. They expect that you're just going to eat that cost. So I very quickly moved from doing works that needed framing to working on the gallery wrap canvases, because I just paint the edges black. Right now, this doesn't work with the narrow profile canvas that's only like 1/2 inch or whatever. It just looks like it needs something. But the gallery wrap canvases that are like 1 inch, 1 3/4 or whatever, when you paint the sides black, it looks done. You don't need to frame it. And that's good for a lot of reasons. So first of all, a lot of people now really like that. Here's a story. We recently sold a painting, and it was a big, long one. I think it was 15 by 30. And anyways, what had happened is the canvas had gotten sort of warped, right? Which happens sometimes on those really kind of long canvases. And so when it got to the clients, he said, oh, the painting is like, when it's on the wall, one corner hangs out a little bit. Is there anything you can do? So I said, well, take to my framer and see. And what had happened is when they stretched the canvas from the manufacturer, they cut off the excess kind of as it folds back. So he didn't have enough to grip it and re-stretch it on a new stretcher. So the only way that we could flatten the painting out was to put it into a fairly sturdy float frame. And so anyways, I told him, I said, oh, okay, like, you know, sorry about that. Like I don't think it was like that when we shipped it, but sometimes when it gets in the cold, like changing temperatures can do it. I said, we'll frame it for free for you. We'll eat that cost, and my son will come pick it up. And then they said, well, we don't want it framed. We want it unframed. And it's like, okay, well, then I'm going to have to refund you the money. We'll take the painting back, but you can, and this was during my annual kind of show for my subscribers where they get a special discount once a year when I subscribe, when I give a discount to my subscribers. So I said, okay, well, you can have the discount for anything you see of mine kind of going forward. But that was someone that didn't even want it framed. And so I would recommend everybody, when you're starting out, right, framing eats up a ton of your cash flow. If you have 20 paintings and you're spending $100 to frame them, and that's if you're doing it yourself and doing it cheap, that's $2,000 of your money tied up there. That's money that could be spent on canvases, on paints, on doing more shows. So I recommend, again, working on the gallery wrap canvases, just paint the edges black, and then offering framing as an upsell. So I have a number of frame moldings that we have available. That if someone wants to buy one of my originals, and they want it framed, I'll frame it for them. But they're going to pay me that up front. I'm also gonna kick a little extra in, so I'm making money on the framing, and I know I'm not going to have to reframe it again, or it's not going to hang around until it gets damaged. So that's what I would recommend for anyone starting out. And even if you're painting watercolor now, you don't need to frame watercolors anymore. Golden produces, it's called the DMSA varnish. This sounds crazy, but it's actually true. It's not water based, it's solvent based, but you can varnish a watercolor painting. So the watercolor painting on paper, and then you can mount that. And what some of my students are doing in my Hungry Artist community, they're mounting their watercolors to the wooden panels. So you know how you can buy, just like the gallery wrapped canvases, you can buy like the cradled wooden panels that have like the wide edge on the side of it. They're mounting their watercolors to the wooden panel, and then they're varnishing them, and then they're hanging them just like that with no frame. And people are liking it. And it actually really looks well now, particularly in new homes. It has kind of a modern look. So I would never frame a painting on spec ever going forward. That one that we framed is the only one that I have currently that's framed, and it's only because we needed to straighten out the canvas because it was slightly warped. So that's what I would recommend going at. Whatever medium you're working in, try and do it in a way where you can do it on the gallery wrap canvases and just paint the edge black. And then if it falls and it gets scuffed, you just put more black paint on it, right? You're not replacing a frame. Okay. Oh, presenting your work at something like a festival? Yeah, I don't spend any money on a festival, on framing. And there's a lot of stuff that I didn't cover in my book that the book was much longer. And then the students in my art academy came back to me and said, that's not one book, that's two books. So that first book was mainly about the whole idea of getting your art to the level that where people are actually buying it, and then kind of starting to sell. The next book that I'm going to be doing is on scaling your income. It's like, okay, basically, like for me, once I had that aha moment at the Toronto Art Festival, what did I do then to scale my income to where I was making multiple six figures, and then all the ways you can do that. But yeah, that probably should have been in the book. That's a good one, yeah, because it's pretty simple actually. I just recommend whenever you can, don't frame, because it eats up. The biggest thing most artists are suffering from is cash flow, right? Starving art. If you're starving as an artist, every time you do a show, you need to save $2,000 to do the framing. You're not going to do as many shows. Whereas if you could just spend the money on canvases and the paints and doing shows, you could do 5 times as many shows, which is potentially 5 times as many sales, or at least getting 5 times as much feedback from people about what of the various things you're doing they love. Okay. Is it good to make prints of good pieces and sell those? Okay, prints is kind of a funny thing. So here's what I can tell you about prints. If you're not selling your originals, if people aren't buying your originals, they will just not buy your prints, right? Artists often think, well, but they're getting like a much cheaper value. But you got to remember, people like me are putting prints out there too, right? So it's like, are they going to buy your print instead of my print or instead of another artist's print? So prints are, if you're not making sales of your work, prints are not a good way to generate sales, because if people don't love the original enough that you're selling, then you're just doing a print of something that people are like, take it or leave it. Maybe I'd hang it if it was free, but I'm not paying for it, right? But once you start selling your work, and once you start selling consistently, then yes, prints can be a very good way to make additional income. And they can be a very good way even early on. So I'll tell you a story of one of the ladies in my art academy. She's in the Hungry Artists. Her name's Candace Cobb. This story blows my mind. Candy's the same age as me. She started painting 2 years ago. She made over $50,000 this year from her art. And that just blows my mind. And she's a watercolor painter, but she's all in, right? She was just like when I mentored Brooke. She's just all in about art every day. And she has improved dramatically over the course of that first year and into this year, to the point that her watercolors started selling really, really quickly at festivals. And she did a lot of festivals. So then she started doing prints of her work. And if you're going to do prints of your work, I really recommend self-publishing. You can get like an Epson desktop Giclée printer. Don't quote me on this, but I think for less than $500 US, that will allow you to print up to 13 inches wide on a special watercolor paper. So you're doing a Giclée print on watercolor paper, and the cost is very, very cheap. The markup is about 10 times what your cost is. And so when her works started selling really, really well, and she couldn't keep up with the demand, then she started doing prints even at festivals and selling them either just in a crystal clear bag or just matted in a crystal clear bag. And she's doing very well. Like I say, between her originals and her prints this year, she did over 50,000 in sales in her second year. This is not her second year of trying to sell her art. She just started painting 2 years ago, which shows you what's possible in a very short period of time. And I started out doing that too. When my work was doing really, really well at the festivals, I bought a small desktop Epson Giclée printer, and we did little paper prints. And that very first festival that I did, it was an outdoor show. I did $1,200 in sales of my paper prints. But I also bought myself a mat cutter. And I was, when you buy a sheet of mat board, it's like, okay, I'm going to cut it into fours, quarter sheets. I'm going to do mats for those. I'm going to paint paintings then to fit in those mats. And then in the inserts that come out, I'm going to treat that as a mat and figure out what the insert is in that. And I'll do paintings in that size so that now I'm maximizing. So from one sheet of mat board, I can mat 8 prints. And that's a pretty good value. And so I would specifically do paintings in those sizes just so that I could get prints to put in there. But it's a very good way when you're starting out, once your work is selling. But until your work is selling, no. And then, like I say, with us now, we do, I eventually went out and got a big Giclée printer. We can do prints up to 44 inches wide. Like my big diptychs of my work, the Giclée prints sell for like $2,400. And the cost to do that is probably about $140. So the markup is huge. If you're going through another printer, you're barely going to make any money because you're probably paying 50% of the cost of the print. Whereas when you're doing it yourself, it's about 5% of the cost of the print to actually print it, the materials. And not only that, you can try multiple prints because you're in charge of everything, right? You can just put a print out and see if it works. Oh, well, because if you're getting the printer to do it, you got to pay setup costs, everything else. I initially wanted to have someone else do. I initially was printed by Mill Pond Press, which same ones that did Robert Bateman and all the big names out there. But what I learned very quickly was that, in the heyday of limited edition prints, Robert Bateman was doing a limited edition of 34,000 prints. He was only getting about 6% of retail, but 6% of retail on 34,000 prints is still a lot of money. He was making millions from his prints. But then and people were buying prints because they thought they were investments and they were just putting them under their bed. And then and that was a real thing for about 5 years. Everybody thought, I'm going to get the Bateman, Grey Wolf, or the Trisha Romance, whatever, because it's sold out. People were just thinking they were buying them like stock certificates. And then there was a big crash in the stock market and everybody tried to unload what they thought were valuable prints, only to find out that everybody else was doing the same. And that Bateman's Grey Wolf that they paid $500 for, that was selling for $1,000 at one time, they couldn't even get $100 for it. So then what happened in the publishing industry is people went, okay, limited edition prints, we only wanted limited edition of like 100. But the problem was artists were still only getting 6%. So that first year I was with a big publisher, they did about 110,000 in sales of my work, and I made $6,000. And thought, this is not a good business plan. And that's when I started thinking about publishing myself. I actually looked at trying to find a printer And what I found, I actually have some background in this because my dad was the head pressman at one of Toronto's top art prints, lithography shops. But what was happening at that point is the Giclée printing was just coming out. What was happening, all the guys that were in printing and all the print houses were offset litho guys who were being dragged, kicking and screaming into the 21st century. They didn't know what they were doing. I wasted about $4,000 going to different printers trying to get proofs of my work, and the work was and the prints were horrible. And then that's when I discovered, oh, the people who are at the forefront of digital printing are not printers, it's photographers. And I was able to take a workshop through a guy by the name of Michael Reichman, who's since passed away, but he was one of the top in the industry at printing, because the same type of guys that had their dark rooms at home and would spend an hour in a dark room dodging and burning to get that print perfect, they were the ones that were really pushing now for digital printing, and they were actually writing a lot of the software. And then I realized, oh, I can do this myself. So we do all of our publishing ourselves. I taught my son how to do it. My son Cameron, he's hosting the meeting. If you hear me talking to somebody, he's in my ear here, and he's actually producing the meeting and deciding what gets up. But yeah, you can definitely make a living from prints, but I would really recommend self-publishing. Like literally, I made the investment of my very first printer made back in that first show. When we decided to start doing our big prints on our own, I invested $25,000. So that's in the camera, the lighting, the big 25-inch iMac, the printer, all of that kind of stuff. In that first year, we made $50,000 in profit off my prints. But again, that's only because I was already selling well and my work was in demand. If you're not making money off your originals, do not think that prints are going to be the thing that's going to make you money. You're just going to not make money off your prints. That's all about the art first. Yeah. Okay. So, and the other thing too, typically, how do we price prints? About 20% of the cost of an original, right? So if you're selling an original of the same size, right? So if you're selling an original, say for a 24 by 24 for $2,500, then you want the cost of the print to be about 20% of that. That's typically what you see. So that also means that your originals have to be priced high enough that at 20%, you're still making some profit. And again, if you're printing yourself, you can, because there's a lot of margin. If you're paying someone else to do your prints, they might be charging you more than 20% of what you're selling an original for, which means there's no point in kind of doing it. No, the other thing I can say though is that you can do prints of a painting that sold for a fair bit of money. And if you're just doing little 8x8 prints matted, you can sell them for whatever the market will bear, 49, 59 bucks, something like that. But when you're talking about the same size print of the original, about 20%. And so, yeah, your originals have to be selling at least at enough of a value that 20% you can make a profit. And again, you can make a lot more profit if you're doing it all yourself. If you're getting someone else to do it, they're probably charging you more than 20% of the cost of the original to do the print for you. Okay, especially considering the plague of AI, do you think careers such as book cover artists or any illustrator for that matter are viable? I get that question a lot. And here's what I can tell you, that even in something as specific as like book cover illustration, whatever, because we did a ton of research in coming up with the book cover. And everything that I saw on there was that, people can pretty quickly recognize when a book cover was done with AI. And it's like, if you just want something out there and someone's not willing to get the best they can possibly get, then AI might be commoditizing some of that stuff. Same with illustration, yeah, it potentially is going to be commoditized by AI. But fine art, the type of art that I do, where you're creating original art that someone is going to buy to hang in their home, I actually think AI is helping us, because I think again, you just referred to AI as a plague, right? Which a lot of people are, because it's commoditizing creativity, but it's also doing it at a very basic level. And I really think that, and I've already seen it, there's a real hunger for people to have something that is touched by the hand of an artist, and in particular, an original painting that was created that's kind of a one-off. So I think that that is always going to remain safe. That if you are creating great art, and again, the way we define great art in the world of commercial sales is not by what a critic says, not it's by do enough people go, oh my God, I love that, I have to have it. I'd be willing to give up my vacation just to bring that painting home. There will always be a market for work that does that, that was created by the hand of an artist. When you're talking about very specific tasks like book cover illustration, I think what's going to happen is it will weed out the middle, right? There's no way that AI is going to be able to do, and same with illustration. I don't think there's any way AI is going to be able to do works that will come close to what Frank Frazetta or Bernie Fuchs or Maxfield Parrish did. And even if so, there are people who are still going to be willing to pay for something that was done by the hand of an artist. But when it is something where it's like a job, again, like an illustration or book design, I think there is a bigger chance that it's going to be commoditized because people are trying to cut costs, right? But I also think that the people that are at the highest level will be safe, but the people who are mediocre, they definitely, they will get pushed out because AI can do mediocre stuff. I mean, I looked at all that and we decided with ours, you know, like on my background is graphic design, right? I have a diploma in graphic design. So I designed my cover. We actually shot pictures of my palettes and then did masks on it so that the lettering is actually like the mixed palette on the paint where you see the blues and the reds. And I spent a lot of time studying the book covers of best-selling self-help books and kind of, okay, what are the common things that they do? So that was designed totally by me. But I do think AI is going to weed out the middle of everything, right? Whether you're a copywriter, and anything that it can do, where it can approximate what the mediocre people do, then it's going to weed them out. So the best hedge against AI is to be absolutely brilliant at what you do, because I don't think it will ever touch the people at the top of the creativity and the skill that are doing the very best work. I hope. Okay, as a use of perfectionist, I use the best of materials, especially for the final glaze, because I don't want it to discolor. But I've been advised not to. People don't care. No need for glaze. For acrylic, your thoughts. Okay, I get that question a lot too from people about varnishing, because I paint in oil. And so I'm assuming that you're using like golden acrylics, which is one of the top kind of acrylics out there. If you're going to do a varnish, you may as well do the best quality, right? Because it's not costing you that much to glaze an acrylic painting with a varnish. I would not put a varnish on if it was cheap, because if it yellows, then yeah, you don't want that. You want something that's archival. But even the whole question of varnishing is a thing. Like varnishing used to be very, very important in paintings, because the varnish's job was to trap all the pollutants in the air, right? And you got to remember, people used to heat and light their houses with fire. And people used to smoke inside their homes, although some people still do it, as amazing as that is. So over the course of time, painting would get covered with a lot of smoke from fires, from people smoking, all that kind of stuff. And the varnish's job was to create a barrier so that when it got really bad, you could remove the varnish, remove all the bad stuff, and then just put another layer of varnish on there. But nowadays, with stuff going into people's homes where, for the most part, they don't smoke, we don't heat our houses with fireplaces, you don't absolutely need to have a varnish if it's going into someone's house, I don't think. And for me, I varnish everything before it goes out, but I've had situations where I've been painting at festivals, I've been away on painting trips, or a painting is still wet and I'm finishing it and someone says, I want to buy it. And it's like, okay, that's not going to get varnished by me because it's not even dry. It's not going to be dry for a couple of weeks. And I always just say to people, and they ask me, do I need to varnish it? And I just say, well, listen, if it's just going into a house where nobody smokes, and it's not going like in a kitchen where there's all kinds of like grease and stuff in the air, then probably not. Um, but if it is going into any of those environments, then yeah. And then I would just say to them, you can reach out to me. Like anyone can use it. I use Camar spray varnish by Krylon for all of my paintings. Very easy. Just follow the instructions on the label. I like varnishing a painting too because it evens out the shine. And the way that I paint, because I coat the canvas first with acrylic and then I put a layer of the gel of the oil medium in there and then paint into that. Some areas are shinier than others when the painting is finished. And I like the look of an overall shine. So when I spray it with the Camar varnish, then that evens the shine out all over. And then it's a matter of taste. Don't ask me if I prefer matte or satin or gloss. It's just a matter of taste, what you like most. But that's what I'd say. If you are going to varnish it, then yeah, I would use the best quality. And it also depends. Like, you know, if people are spending $5 or $10 or $15,000 on a painting of mine, they expect it archivally varnished. If they're spending $20 on an acrylic painting, not so much, right? So that depends too in terms of what are you charging. But if you're going to varnish, then use top quality archival acrylic varnishes. What's next, Cam? We got any more? Oh, this is a good one. I'm a beginning artist and I need a photo, but I'm having a hard time finding non-copyright photos that I could use. Does everyone draw from their own? I'm assuming you mean that. Okay, so here's the deal as a beginning artist. We're going to talk about copyright because everybody needs to know about copyright here. Save yourself from ending up in court and potentially spending thousands of dollars on legal fees. When someone creates something, copyright is inherent as soon as they do it. If I take a picture, as soon as I take that picture, I own copyright on that photograph. Nobody can use that photograph to create works, to copy it, or even to derive works from it without my written permission, other than a few exceptions, right? And so that's what we're going to talk about first, because these things, copyright only comes into play when you are starting to exhibit your work publicly or when you're trying to sell your work. There are some exceptions to copyright that are called fair use. So one of those is if you're just doing something for enjoyment, right? So if you are just painting for fun and you want to copy one of my paintings, have at it. No problem. If you are just painting to learn, you're able to copy my paintings, copy my process, create your version of my painting, fine. But you're only doing it for fun. You're only doing it to learn. It's okay to do that. Where you breach copyright is if you then take a picture of that and push publish on your social media and say, here's the painting I did, right? Now you've breached my copyright. Where you breach copyright is if you sell that painting, right? Now you've breached copyright. So when you're starting out, if you're still just learning and you have no thought of selling your work, then you are exempt under the fair use in terms of copyright. Just be aware. You can never sell any of the work that's done from someone else's photos. You can't post it on your website. You can't enter it into a jury show. You can't do anything with it. Once you start either kind of posting, even just posting it on social media, or entering it in an art festival, selling it, whatever, now you're breaching copyright. If it's from someone else's original painting, photograph, whatever. And at that point, you have two options. One is, yeah, you can subscribe to some sites where they give you certain permissions to use their photos for derivative works. I don't recommend that for two reasons. One, and again, everything that I'm talking about is if your ultimate goal is to get where I am, right? Where you're making multiple six figures from your art. You don't want it to be known that, well, you're not even the artist. You're just copying the creativity of someone else. Because once you get a certain amount of skill, you give me any great photograph, I'll create a great painting for you. And I'll know 99% of the work was done by the photographer, not for me. So it's like at a certain point, you need to be creating from your own photographs if you want this to be a career. But when you're starting out, And I started out, I did copies of Zoltan Szabo's paintings. I bought art books and did copies of the books. Actually, and you'll find that like Zoltan Szabo has a whole pile of watercolor books where the whole point of buying the book is you get to do a paint along, right? I sell my courses where people do a paint along with me, where they follow through the whole thing. But it's very clear in there that you do not have my permission to use this for a commercial purpose. I do say you can post it as long as you say this is the painting I did based on Tim Packer's, Fire and Water course or Birches and Crimson Maples, whatever. But if they were to sell it, if they were to post it and claim it as their own, they're breaching copyright. And you don't want to. I can tell you, I did have someone, and if you are copying someone else's work, if the person you're copying is fairly well known and fairly successful, they will find out. I found out there was an artist who was painting copies of my paintings, and then he was starting to do limited edition prints of his copies of my paintings. Well, eventually, someone who knows my work saw it, reached out to me. I went and checked. He'd copied over 100 of my paintings that he'd sold. He was doing prints of it. And I get a lot of things where people reach out to me and say, someone's copying your work. And I'll go and I'll check. And it's like, oh, yeah, they've got one or two paintings on their social media where it's an obvious copy of my work. And at that point, I'll just reach out to them very nicely and say, listen, I see that you've got copies of my work there. You're breaching my copyright. You don't have my permission. I'm not going to take any action as long as you take the work down and don't reoffend. But this guy, because it had gone so far, I just went right to, I contacted the RCMP first and found out that they'll only press charges if it's a risk to people. So I was on my own. I went to intellectual property lawyer. We sued the guy. And it ended up costing him. And here's a thing that is an irrebuttable presumption in law in Canada, I think in the US too, but don't quote me on the US. If you sue someone for copyright infringement and you win or they settle, at the very least, they have to pay your legal fees. So this guy had to pay $25,000 to my lawyer. And my lawyer, when we went through it all, it was very clear that this was a copyright infringement. So they just said, we'll take you on a $1,000 retainer and we'll just collect everything else once we get the judgment. And he ended up settling out of court. But it cost him a lot of money. And so it's just best don't. It's like work from your own photos. The great thing about now, though, I remember when I first started out, I used to spend over $1,000 a year in developing costs for film, right? Because I started before digital cameras even existed. Now you can shoot thousands of photos and go on and edit them to create great photos of your own to paint from. But here's also why I recommend working from your own is the most important thing about any painting is a composition. And it's the way you arrange the various shapes, values, edges, elements in there. And when you're framing that shot, you're composing. If you're working from someone else's photos, they've already done all the work. So not only do they get all the credit, but you're not exercising those compositional muscles to the point where you can shoot great photos to paint from. So that's my thoughts on that. Next, Cam. Okay, good. Do you travel far for festivals or locally only? That's a really good question. And what I would recommend for anybody is when you're starting out, you start small, right? You want to know, first of all, is there anyone out there who wants to pay for your art what you are willing to sell it for? And so you start small, the small local festival. And as you become more successful, and your work starts getting higher prices where you can reasonably expect to sell X number of paintings or X number of dollars at a festival, then it might make sense to start traveling. And here's what I found when I was once kind of my voice had kind of just before it was really fully resolved. But I was finding that, if I did a small festival that was, 100 to 200, I would probably sell $2,000 or $3,000 worth of art. If I did a festival that was twice as expensive, I would sell twice as much. And if I did a festival that was 5 times as expensive, I would sell 5 times as much, because the more expensive festivals are usually bigger, they're more well known, they attract a higher quality of buyer. And so you can figure out what that is. But here's the thing you need to understand, right? 2 times 0 is 0, and 10 times 0 is 0. So if you're not selling anything at the smaller festivals, You are not likely going to sell anything at the bigger festivals. But as you start out, if you're selling at kind of local, and then I could reasonably expect if I went to, because I did travel at some point, not huge, but I did several shows where I traveled, 6, 7 hour drive and stayed in a hotel for 3 days, because I could reasonably expect I was going to do $4,000 or $5,000 in sales, and I did. But I didn't expect that on a hope. I did that because I'd had past experience of that type of festival. I can reasonably expect to do this type of sales. And one other thing that's really good in terms of determining, because it's like, how do you determine a good festival, right? You can go to some festivals that are horrible where no people are just walking around for free entertainment, and other ones where people come really, really prepared to buy. One of the best ways to judge that is to get to know the artists in your kind of region, province, kind of city, whatever, that are fairly successful artists on the festival circuit, right? And then go to their website and see what festivals they're doing. Because chances are they've already spent a lot of time doing a lot of festivals, and they've figured out which festivals attract good audiences that are prepared to buy. So if you see someone and well, that person is pretty well known, and that's another reason why I say join your local artist group, because they'll know. The buzz goes around when all of a sudden you hear that so and so did 5,000 in sales last week, and it's like, oh my God, like, yeah, he did like 10,000 last year at this other festival. Artists know which artists are doing well, and when you can see what shows are they doing, that's at least people are coming there to buy. And if that artist is doing the show, it's probably a good show. But I would start locally and inexpensive, and again, inexpensive, because just because I lived in Toronto didn't mean I was going to do the Toronto Art Expo. I was 5 years into my career before I felt confident to spend $5,000 to do that, even though it was local. But I would say you want the most inexpensive festivals starting off. Typically, they're easier to get into. And you can use that as a learning experience then as you're kind of going on that search to find that ultimate voice. I hear a lot of artists must sell oils. Drawings don't sell as well. Color sells over black and gray. I draw usually black and white. Should I maintain, or will experience teach me the error of my ways? Well, that's a very good question. I agree with what you said. Color sells better than black and white, right? Because most people prefer, if they're buying it to go into their home or they're buying it to go into their office, typically colored works, fit better kind of with their decor, whatever. The color can elicit an emotional reaction on its own that black and white doesn't have the ability to do. But I would say there are artists out there who do very well with drawing, but they are at the tippy top in terms of skill, right? So if you are or can become known as one of the best draftsmen in the world, or draftswoman, but that your drawings are at the absolute pinnacle, there are people who will pay for that. But if your drawings are just good, then you're not, even if your paintings are just good, you're not going to be able to make a living from that. Not very likely. And even if your paintings are or your drawings are very good, let's two varies. Even if your drawings are very, very good, but not great, people are still more likely to buy an artist's work that's in color that's just very good. So that's slightly lower potentially in terms of the overall quality, desirability, whatever, just because of color. So is it possible to make a career just off drawing? Yes, there are. And there are artists out there whose drawings go for crazy money, but they are the absolute best at the world at it, right? And they're also something unique. Ideally, you want to have a unique voice where people recognize not only the greatness, kind of better than everyone else in terms of the technical skill, the desirability, all that kind of stuff, but also something unique about your voice where they go, I know who did that, right? That's much more difficult to do within drawing. So yes, it's possible. But there's no sales. technique that's going to help you. That's the one thing I guess I wanted to mention on here, but hasn't been asked yet. But people often ask me, like, can you help me sell the work I'm doing now? And the answer is probably not, right? Other than one kind of specific circumstance. Because if people are not already buying the work you're doing, it means that the work you're doing is not engaging that reaction in people where they say, oh my God, I love it. I want to take it home and hang it in my house because I want to walk into a room every day and see it. If your work is not doing that, no amount of business or marketing stuff is going to help you. At that point, you have not a business problem, you have an art problem. And so that's what I say to people. It's like, I can't probably help you sell the work you're doing unless the problem is you haven't yet put your work out there at all, even to start seeing if people want to buy it, or potentially you're putting it out in front of the wrong audience. Again, if you're trying to sell your work, but you're putting it out in an audience where people there are not interested in buying art, then yeah, my book can help you find places that we already talked about, right? Art festivals, studio tours, doing your own open house, whatever. In that case, business solutions might be able to help you. But if your work is being seen by people and they are not buying, then I can help you. And that's the first half of the book, which is how to actually master the skills, master the concepts, push your creativity and process mode, use influences from other artists to grow your skill and all of that type of thing until you can consistently create great work with a unique voice. But you can't just, unless you're already doing that, there's no amount of marketing that can help. But the good news is, if you have, let's talk about this because no one's asked me, what do you need to be a successful artist? You need 4 things if you want to be able to make the same kind of living that I've made off my art. You need to have a passion for art. You need to have a solid work ethic, and you need to have a willingness to learn. Those 3 things you need to provide. Now that doesn't mean that guarantees you you're going to have a successful career because you could do what I did for many years, which was spend a lot of time on the wrong things at the wrong time that really didn't move the needle. The 4th thing that you need to have is a plan, right? You need to have a plan to actually consistently build on your skill, your knowledge, your creativity, your experience, spending time in process mode to find that unique voice. And again, that's where I can help you. So again, in the book, I talk about it, but also in the book, again, if you buy during launch week, if you go to the back of the bonuses page and go to that URL and claim it before February 6th, you get my course, which is Creating Your Plan for Success, which actually walks you through the different stages and how to actually, what you should be focusing on at each stage of the career. But if you have all those things, you can definitely become successful. But passion does not just mean I love painting. All kinds of people say, oh, I love painting. It's like, I love golf. I've been golfing for almost my entire life. I have the 10,000 hours put into golf. I still kind of suck at it. I'm still a 19 handicap, 18 handicap. I bogey every hole, which is pretty good. But I haven't gotten better because I'm content just going out there and playing reasonably good golf. I mean, 18 handicap is not great, but I don't embarrass myself. I can go out and play any course, but I don't delude myself that I should be making a living from golf, right? I'm just happy. I love playing mediocre golf. For something to qualify as a passion, you not only need to love doing the thing, you have to have an irresistible compulsion to master everything about it. And you need to be willing to do the work required to do that, right? If you have that, that's why Candace Cobb was able to go from not painting to making $50,000 in 1 year, because she went at it hammer and tongs, and she's just relentless in that desire to learn, to get better, get better. I see all kinds of people that have been painting for 50 years, and they've been painting mediocre paintings for 50 years, and they enjoy it. And if it's a hobby, fine, but don't delude yourself into thinking that it should be, that the world should somehow reward you for painting mediocre paintings for 50 years any more than it rewards me for playing mediocre golf for 50 years. So yeah, passion, work ethic, willingness to learn, then you need a plan. And so again, in the book, I actually lay out everything that I've learned over the years. There's enough in there that I think will help people, but you also get that course for free. if you buy during the bonus week. And if you're interested in hands-on, then my Hungry Artist community. Like I say, I do these calls every week, but then we actually look at artists' work and give critique and specific advice there. Okay, what's next? Hi, Tim and Cameron. How many paintings should you have to sell at an art fair? That's actually a good question. Now, when you're starting out, you're probably only doing a few festivals or a festival. So, I mean, there's no right answer there, but it kind of goes on a spectrum, right? Because it's like you need, if you want to sustain a living from selling paintings at an art fair, art fairs and art festivals, then what you want to be doing is typically selling more paintings in a show than you are able to create for the next show. So if you say you're doing one festival every month, and you can create 10 paintings in a month. If you're just doing art festivals, then you want to sell more than 10 paintings every month so that you are now painting to replenish the pieces that you've sold. And the reason you want to sell more than what you're painting is when you can no longer keep up with the demand, that's when it's time to raise prices, right? So if you're painting 12 paintings a month and you're only selling 8 paintings a month, if you're just doing art festivals, then you have to do more art festivals, right? To be able to sell all the work, or potentially do galleries and have more outlets for selling your work. But I would say that whether it's a better question is not just art galleries, it's how many paintings do you ideally want to sell in a month? It's like at least 1 or 2 more than you're able to paint in a month. Because if you can do that, then the next month you're going to raise your price slightly, right? And then you see what happens. And the thing about raising prices, and again, the reason we want to sell is when people see an artist is selling, that makes your work more desirable because it reinforces their belief. Most people, because of all the nonsense that's gone on in the art world over the last few years, and it's like a banana duct taped to a wall or a urinal or an exhibition of invisible art, the average person feels very insecure about their own ability to judge whether a piece of art is worth what it's being charged or whether it's worth anything at all. But when they see that lots of other people are buying this artist's work, and if they like your work, well, that confirms to them that, okay, they're not the only one that likes this artist's work. A lot of people like this artist's work. So I can feel pretty confident in my decision that this is something I want to take home and hang on my walls. But what happens is that kind of strengthened belief means more people feel that way. More people will kind of cross the hump of liking the work to want to buy the work. And now your prices can start going up. And I went from the year before I did that, the Toronto Art Expo, I think that year I didn't make $30,000 in the entire year. And then by the time that show happened in March, I'd already made over 30 because I'd had the 2 paintings sell at the Burlington Art Auction. I'd had the commission I'd done for the person on the board. And then in the show I did 28,000. So I made more by kind of the middle of March than I'd made the year before. But then my earnings went up to about $130,000 without me doing anything else. And then I started showing with the galleries, which meant they were taking 40% of the work. But my work went from kind of $30,000 in a year over the course of 4 or 5 years up to over $130,000 with nothing changing except I was continually raising my prices. Because the more that my work sold, the more that expanded my brand, the more people became aware of my work, the more people wanted my work. And it's kind of like, I can't keep up with the demand. And for me, it was just whenever I can't keep up with the demand, it's like, like I've got 5 paintings here and I've got 2 galleries calling me and they both sold 4 paintings in the last month. And now I'm four paintings short. It's like, okay, my prices just went up. And you can raise them 5, 10%. And it's amazing though, when you're doing that, almost on a monthly basis, in the space of 3 or 4 years, I went from charging $500 for a 24 by 24 to $1,900 and never being able to keep up with the demand. And now it's like $2,500. And my work would be a lot more expensive now, except I haven't had the work to sell. because for the last 5 years I've been focusing on the Art Academy. Um, but you ideally want to be selling faster than you can paint. And if you're selling way too fast, then you need to do one of two things. You need to kind of, well, reduce the amount of festivals you're doing, or what I like even better is just raise your prices. Um, but that's it. You don't want to be in a situation where you're adding 10 paintings to your inventory every week, and at the end of the year, you got 120 paintings left. I'm selling well online. Would you say do festivals too? I have a daytime job. If you can, and here's the thing that I love. The artists that I've mentored that have had the most successful careers and had the most success at the beginning, they've done all of it, right? Because there's if you're just doing festivals, then you're missing out on some potential. And if you're just doing online, you're missing out on some potential. But if you're doing both, you can really maximize it. And the if you have one artist just doing festivals and one artist just doing social, and you have another artist that's doing both, and they're at about the same level, the artist that's doing both will achieve success faster and will make more money than either one that's just doing one. And I'll explain why. I'll give you some strategies and why this works, right? So when you're selling your work, one of the things when you first start out that's really important, and when you're selling yourself and you're selling on social media, so you're selling direct to clients, one of the things that's really important is building that client list, right? And by that I mean emails, because social media is great, except you don't have the ability in any given post to direct who that goes out to, right? You could have a post that goes viral that gets 200,000 views, and all these people love your work, and then the next post you send out might only go to 100 or 1,000 people. You don't have the ability to reach out to them at will for free. Now you can pay for advertising and all that kind of things. But one of the things that we have now as artists, one of the best things is your email list and your ability to get the contact information of people who are interested in you and your work, so that you have the ability to reach out to them when you want, whether you're having an online sale, whether it's I have a show coming up at this gallery, whether it's I have a new collection of work that I'm offering, whatever. When you have your email, you have the ability to reach out to them forever until or unless they subscribe at no cost. I mean, you need to pay for a CRM, which is customer relations management kind of software, whether that's MailChimp, or we use Aweber, or it's even on Kajabi. They have like a mail thing for my courses. But once you've got someone's email, if they are interested in you and your work, you have the ability to reach out to them whenever you want, right? It's social media. You're always at the whims of the algorithm of the media. You know, you might get a ton of response on a reel that's just silly, and then you post another reel about a painting that's for sale and it only goes to 500 people. Whereas if you have a huge email list, you can reach out to them when you want. And so how do you build your email list? Well, a great way to build your email list is at art festivals. Because, you know, if you go to a festival, some of them you'll have 10,000 people walking through and walking by your booth. If your work is selling well online, that leads me to believe that you're stopping the scroll, right? When people are scrolling, and likely your work will also stop the stroll, right? Which is at an art festival, that's what people do. They stroll along and they just kind of look at different things, and then every once in a while, oh, something stops them, and they go in and look a little more closely, right? And that's what you want to do at an art festival. But you get so many eyes on your work. But now, for the people that are interested in your work, that's an ideal opportunity to capture their email so that you can reach out to them for, again, anything that you're doing. That's how I built my studio open houses to an event that was bringing in $50,000 in a weekend. People would drive 5 or 6 hours to come to my studio open house. But I had all of these people's emails. And the way you do that at a festival is people don't just want to give people their email, right? So if you just ask, give me your email, they're like, no, you need to give before you ask. And so one thing that's a great way to get emails and to build your mailing list is to do like a raffle. Say, if you give me your name and email, I'm going to do a draw for a prize. Now, I've seen people do this as like, I'm going to give you a free iPad. It's like you're going to get a lot of emails of people who want free iPads, but none of them who are likely ever going to buy your art. But the great way to do that at festivals is potentially do a small print of your work, or depending on how quickly you paint, and you could whip off a small original if that's not too big of a thing or whatever, and say, well, I'm building my email list. If you give me your name and your email, I'm going to draw, and somebody's going to win this print or this little tiny original, whatever it is. But that way you're only getting the emails of people who would want one of your paintings or one of your prints, right? And that's the only people you want on your email list. But if you're just doing festivals, then when people come and see your work and they're like, well, what's your next festival? Oh, I'm doing another one in 8 weeks. You don't have a chance to see them until 8 weeks. And if they can't make that festival, you're not going to get them. Whereas if you're also doing work on social media and online, then people you meet at the festival will then have the opportunity to follow you online. And people that follow you online, when you post about, oh, I'm at this art festival or whatever, you'll get your social media following that will potentially come to the festival just to see your work. Emily Valentine, again, one of my kind of huge success stories in the Art Academy. She went from never having sold a piece. Her very first show she sold out, and she sold out in her next three shows. But people were coming to the shows based on her social media. They saw that, because people would go to the festival and come at the end of the day, and she had no more work left. And it's like, well, we want to buy. It's like, well, I'm doing another festival. Well, then they would see her social media. Oh, I'm appearing at this show. They would specifically go early so they got first look at her work. And her work doubled in prices over the course of one summer just by raising it, everything. But putting the three together, the social media and selling online, the in-person festivals, and then developing your mailing list and putting out a newsletter, and then potentially doing an online sale. We also did that. Just getting back to online sales and how important the email list is. When COVID struck, we decided that we were going to close down my gallery. So I ran my own commercial gallery very successfully for about 5 years. And then like 6 months into COVID, we just thought, well, this is pointless, right? Nobody was out. Everybody was stuck at home. So, and my lease was coming up. And I was tired of running the gallery. It was great to have my own gallery. I loved it. That was kind of a dream I think most artists have. But at a certain point, it just becomes a lot of work that takes away from painting. So we decided to close the gallery. But I had a problem because I had a number of originals because I only sold my work in the gallery. So I had a whole gallery full of my originals, as well as a ton of prints that we had already stretched that were kind of hanging on the walls. And I was going to have to rent a storage unit just to store the work, because by that time I'd cut back on the number of galleries that I was using. I was only in 3 galleries that had been with me since the beginning, but I was selling 80% of my work. And so I thought, what am I going to do with all this work? And then I thought, I know, we'll have an inventory sale. So I thought, I'm going to offer just in stock, just the work that I have. I'm going to offer that at a 20% discount just to people on my mailing list, just to get rid of this work so I don't have to rent a storage unit. And so that was kind of tricky, because then we had to create an online gallery that only had the pieces in stock. And some of them we might have had 2 prints, some of them we might have had 1. And if it was something we didn't have in stock, it wasn't for sale. But we let people know this is first come, first serve. Once it's sold, it's sold. You can't order prints at the discounted price. This is only to get rid of the inventory we have. We did 45,000 in sales in about 3 or 4 hours. And I realized that was because, there's 3 things that deal towards having a sale, right? It's first of all, the desirability, right? Does someone really like this and want it? Obviously people like my work. The other thing is the availability, the scarcity, right? Can you buy something you love as much from another artist at a similar price? And it's for people that like my work. It's like, no, they can't. But then we introduced the urgency. There's only this painting, this original. It was only one. When it's sold, it's gone. You can't get another at this price. And that created a feeding frenzy. That actually led to a strategy that we do every year. We do an online sale of my work like that, just the originals I have in my house and one of every Giclée. And we've had a couple other sales where we've done like 40,000 in sales. But I wouldn't have been able to do that if I didn't have the mailing list, right? And I got most of the mailing list was from in-person people dealings with over the years with clients at festivals, people coming to my open house and that. So, but yeah, open social media, festivals, and developing a mailing list. If you do all three, you will get more successful faster. But again, you have to kind of put that into what's reasonable with your job, right? You don't need to turn professional overnight or whatever. This is a marathon, not a sprint. So it's kind of like until or unless you're getting that over the top reaction to your work and you go, this is my style, I would say most artists should be spending the majority of their work on developing their art. And if you're selling online, that's great. But once you get to that point, if the sales are going amazing and you really want to maximize your earnings, and the best way to do that is to raise your prices, then you need to get your work in front of as many audiences as possible, which would be, social media, art festivals, potentially your own direct to client stuff, also being in commercial galleries. The more people that see your work, the more different audiences you're in, the more you will sell, which means the demand is going up that you're unable to meet, which means you can keep raising your prices. Okay. Are you going to sell your book outside Amazon? They use Kindle there for ebooks, which isn't popular here where I live. We haven't made those decisions yet. So, and it actually was a decision because here's the deal with Amazon. If you, Amazon has a thing called, what's it called, Cameron? The Kindle special thing or Kindle Unlimited. So Kindle offers a thing to people where they can pay a subscription and they get unlimited free ebooks every month by that. And so the question is, do we want to go into that or not? But the thing is, if you go into where you are also making your book available on Kindle Unlimited, then you cannot sell the ebook anywhere else. You can't sell it on Kobo. You can't sell it on Apple Books. You can't sell it anywhere. So we did a lot of research. And again, I hope you guys get that. Like, do your research on whatever it is you're going to do. We spent a year leading up to the launch of this book, but we did the research and we did hear from a lot of artists that a lot of their sales came from the Kindle Unlimited, because if someone even on Kindle Unlimited goes and reads my book for free, that still counts as a sale and I get paid for that. So it's like, and Kindle is the biggest piece of the pie when it comes to ebooks. I think they're responsible for about 80% of ebook sales across the world. So we decided, at least for now, we are going to enter into the Kindle Unlimited, but that means you can only buy the ebook on Kindle. You can buy the paperback book on Amazon, which I'm assuming like Amazon sells pretty much anywhere. Anywhere they have Amazon, you can buy the paperback version of the book. But for right now, no, you can only get the ebook on Kindle. We are actually going to monitor, because you only have to make a decision month by month. So we will be monitoring the situation over the next few months to see which percentage of the sales is accounted for through Kindle Unlimited. And if it's a healthy amount, we'll stick with it. If it's not, then we'll end the Kindle Unlimited and we probably will go on Kobo, Apple Books, kind of a multitude of platforms. We also right now are only selling the paperback book on Amazon, but we can sell that anywhere. But for us, launching a book is a very, very complicated process. And so we decided for the start, let's just stick with Amazon, have a very good strategy going forward. And as I said, it's doing very well. It's doing as well as I'd hoped it would do. But in terms of going forward, I don't know. Basically the numbers will dictate to us whether we just keep it on Kindle with Kindle Unlimited or whether we open it up to other platforms. We got more, Cam? For beginners, what platform do you recommend to sell from? Okay, I'm assuming someone is talking about selling their art. I do not recommend platforms that where you pay to have an account, where you get to post images of your work, and then people have the potential to buy things like Fine Art America or whatever like that. Because here's the reality on most of those sites: they make their money from renting space on their digital gallery to artists. It's kind of like the vanity gallery, right? You're paying for the potential to have your work there, but on those sites, the majority of artists do not sell very much. Some artists sell a lot. There are some artists on those sites who sell a lot. And if you look, it's like not surprising because their work is amazing. But as a beginner artist, you are going to be one of thousands of beginner artists on that site producing beginner quality work that, first of all, most people are not going to be interested in buying. And even if they are, you're just one of thousands of artists who are producing beginner quality work. So I would recommend that. Let's even talk about that. When is it time to start thinking about selling your work, right? You don't learn how to play golf one weekend and the next weekend start going out trying to compete on qualifying tournaments for the PGA Tour, right? So when we all start as beginners, we all start as amateurs, and pretty much nobody starts good. Although I did go to school with a guy who was brilliant when he was in grade 5. That's a whole other story. But none of us start good. And you don't want to start trying to sell your art until your art is at a sufficient level where the desirability is such that people go, wow, I want to pay for that, right? And quite frankly, 99.9% of us don't start there. So it's not like this whole thing is start creating art and start selling your art. It's like start creating art, spend a lot of time and effort improving your art, mastering the skills, mastering the concepts, spending time in process mode, all of that kind of stuff, just creating those creative muscles until you get to the point where you're consistently creating work that people might want to buy. And here's a good kind of litmus test from when it's time to even think about selling your art. So we all have friends and family. And if you're creating your art and you're serious about it, whenever you have the opportunity, again, you can bring it up in casual conversation that, oh yeah, I'm really getting into art. I'm, getting into painting, whatever, and just kind of mention it. And people will have one of two reactions. They either won't care, or they may say, oh, like what type of work do you do? Or could I see some of your art? And then you show them. So it's a good idea. Have your best work on your phone. Now we've got phones. Have images of your best work on your phone. And if they say, oh, I'd be interested in seeing it, you show them. And then you gauge the reaction. If they just go, oh, that's nice, period, and that's the reaction you're getting, you're not ready to try and start selling your art. Because here's the thing. Ideally, your friends and family and people are going to be more supportive of you and your goals and dreams than a stranger. And if the people in your life see your work and don't ask if they can buy it or if it's for sale or how much, then it's very unlikely that complete strangers are going to be interested in buying your work. But if people are asking you that, oh, how much, or could I buy that? And you start to have the odd sale through people who who are willing to buy your work. Well, then at least somebody finds my work of a sufficient level of desirability that they're willing to pay for it. And then at that point, then that's when you should start looking at potentially selling your work. But I wouldn't immediately go out and get a website and start trying to sell your work. I really think, well, again, you can start doing social media. And again, you will be able to gauge the reaction. If nobody's asking you if your work is for sale on social media, then you're worrying about solving a problem that doesn't exist, which is how do I handle sales, right? But if people are asking you about, oh, I love your work, can I buy it, how to buy it, whatever, when that's coming in, then what I would recommend for people is to do your own website and do it right on Shopify. On Shopify, because here's the thing, you want to be able to have a website where the e-commerce is intrinsic in the process. That they've done all kinds of studies that say someone goes to your website and they see a painting, they have to that they are interested in buying. Every click they have to make makes them 50% less likely of continuing, right? Every step they have to make. So if you just have a website of your work and it's like, email me if you're interested in buying, you're going to lose 50% of the people potentially there. And then if they email you, it's like, oh, okay, now we have another hoop we have to go through for payment or whatever. You're going to lose. If you've got 4 stages that need to go through for a sale to be completed, you're going to lose 50%, 50%. So you're only be getting potentially 10% of the people who are interested. And at the start, that's not going to be very many. At the start, you want everyone that's interested in being able to buy. So the ability to have a buy now button next to the painting where people can just click that and then enter their PayPal, their credit card information or whatever, that's crucial. And you can start off with a very basic website on Shopify. The entire website can be on Shopify, and they also protect you from scammers, right? You'll get all kinds of people reaching out to you wanting to buy your paintings that are actually trying to scam you and trying to scam you out of money. And I may as well go through a few of these here because it may save someone a heartache. So one of the big scams is they'll reach out to you and say, "Oh, I love your works." And they don't make sense. It's like, please send me a list of available works and prices. It's like, that's on my website, right? So just my website's there. If there's something you're interested in, you can buy it. But then they'll say, I am willing to pay by certified check. And that's because most people maybe don't realize. And also, I'm an ex-fraud investigator. I was a detective in the commercial crime unit investigating frauds over $2 million. So I'm pretty good at spotting this. But the scam is certified checks now are one of the easiest things to forge with printers and everything else, right? I can do high quality prints that you can't tell from an original watercolor unless you get a microscope and look at the dither patterns. So it's easy for people to counterfeit certified checks. And many of us grew up at a time when a certified check was certified, right? Well, here's what typically happens then too. They'll say, "I'll pay you in certified check." And one of two things will happen. They'll either overpay you by mistake and say the painting's $1,000, they'll send you a certified check for $1,500. And here's what will happen. That check will initially pass, right? It will initially clear, and you'll get the $1,500 in your account. And then they'll reach out to you a week later to say, "Oh my God, I made an error. I overpaid. Can you just e-transfer me the $500 extra back?" But what happens is, because these forgeries are so good, it takes a while until it gets flagged. So it might be a month until the chargeback comes that this check is a forgery. Now your bank takes that $1,500 out of your account, but you've already sent that person the $500 extra. Now you've just lost $500. And you've also lost the painting if you've shipped it to them. Or the other thing that they'll do is they'll come up with some way of paying for the painting, but they say, "I have my own shipper and I'll look after the shipper. He'll pick up the work. You can just pay him and I'll reimburse you." And what they're doing is, their shipper is probably them, and they're just showing up. They're going to give you a bill for the shipping, and then they're just going to take your painting and throw it in the dumpster. And now they've just scammed you out of $300 or whatever they're charging for the shipping. So the nice thing about having a website, and if you go through Shopify, like, they vet the credit cards. We've never had a chargeback. We've probably sold, including the Art Academy, couple $1 million worth of sales online through Stripe and PayPal. And that's kind of what Shopify uses as well. We've never had a fraudulent purchase where the card was bad or the card was stolen or forged or whatever. So if you go through them and through their payment processing, it's protecting you from that. And all I would say is, from anyone that approaches you about buying a painting and they're trying to dictate how this would go, just run away. It's a scam. You don't go into a store and tell the store owner how you're going to pay for it, right? You ask them, "What payment do you accept?" And it's the same here. And so for me, I only accept, even if I have someone that reaches out to me personally, like on LinkedIn, or I've had a number of sales that have gone through LinkedIn where it's like, as soon as I post the painting, someone says, "Okay, well, I want to buy this. How much is it?" And they go, "Oh yeah, okay." Like, I still will then create that product on my website and tell them to go through my website because I know that's going to protect me. And Shopify now, like when we initially started, we had my website built on WordPress, and then we had Shopify as a plugin, and we still have that just because it's a pain in the you know what to kind of get rid of it and put it all together. But right now, you can build a very simple website just on Shopify that also has the ability where people can just add things to cart and then check out. So that's what I would recommend. Okay, so here we go. So this is a good question. Some people are saying, wow, that's great. You could sell your work. I know, though, that my work is not good enough yet. What would you answer? It's not great yet, but they think I want praises. Well, when people say that, when people say, wow, you should be selling your art, I would say, okay, you should buy some, right? If they're not willing to buy your art, then it's like, okay, right. They're just, as I mentioned at that other the very start, where there people love my work, but they're not even willing to pay the cost of materials. It's like, then they're not really loving your work. Maybe they're just being kind to you, which, you know what, that doesn't hurt. But the only wow, I love it that counts in the village of commercial sales, and if that's what you want to do, is I love it backed by a credit card, a check, or cash. I love you $5, and then I love your work will get you a cup of coffee, right? So if your friends and family are saying, wow, you should sell your work, well, I would say to them, then you should buy my work. And until or unless they start doing that, then maybe, and it is possible, theoretically, it's possible that nobody in your group of family and friends ever has or will buy a piece of art, in which case maybe they're right. And then it's like, well, the way to test that is, like I say, join your local art association, investigate, see what's there. If they have an annual show, put your work in, see if it sells. Or, spring for a festival. A lot of small local festivals, you can do them. A lot of them, they charge like $100, right? So it's like, if the question is my work good enough that anyone would buy it? I would say $100 is worth finding the answer to that. So go and do a festival and see what happens. But yeah, I love your work and you should sell your work and all of these kinds of things. They are not valuable at all, because here's the other thing too. To most people who do not create art, when we start out and even just do moderately competent stuff, that's like magic to them, right? They're like, oh my God, because even just to get to the point where you can do moderately competent art, that takes a fair bit of time and investment and building skill and all of that kind of thing. So for them, they're like, oh my God, you should be selling your art, right? But it's the same, again, same sort of thing. I go back to music a lot too, right? It's like, there's all kinds of people who think they should be huge stars. Their friends and family are telling them, or even people love their work, but it's kind of like, yeah, but would you buy a CD? Would you go see that person in concert? Instead of going to see Taylor Swift, because that's the thing. When they're comparing your work to what they can do, which is zero level of appeal to their work. So they think, wow, you should sell that. But what you need to do is compare your work to other people who are actually selling their work. And so that's where it comes in, that even before going to do a festival, if there's a local festival and you think, well, maybe I want to do it, go walk around the festival this year and see what's happening and find artists whose work is selling. And it's no good finding artists' work who don't sell, because your work might be better than theirs, but theirs still might be at the level that no one's willing to buy. So you don't just want to be the best of the artists who aren't selling, right? So you need to be brutally honest with yourself. Compare your work to the work of other artists that are selling. And that's why I like going on the last day of an art festival, because typically what a lot of artists do is they'll put up their sold stickers as they sell work. So often you can walk around and say, wow, you've probably seen the pictures of me on my social media, I remember that Toronto Art Expo. I had sold stickers, so the price tags with sold dots on them that went from the ground up to 6 feet high. And each sticker was just the size of a business card. So you go around and you see artists who are doing that and go, well, would my work kind of shake out next to theirs? It's like, do I think it's as good? Do I think that someone that had paid X amount of dollars for their work, would they pay that amount for my work? Or just do I but you got to find somebody at that art festival who is not as good as you, who has sold something. And if they haven't, then you go, well, I'm not at the bar. Because when we start out, okay, here's another question I got to answer here. No one's asked it, but I think it's important. And that is, what is your time worth? The time and effort that you put into a painting, what is its worth? Well, the truth is, when we start out, your time is not worth nothing. It's worth less than nothing, right? And here's the example. When we start out, say you take $100 worth of materials. Say you spend $80 on a frame, you know, $10 on a little canvas and $10 worth of paint. You've got $100 in materials and you create a painting. And if you're like me, that first painting you create is pretty god awful, that nobody would even want for free and hang in their house, right? So you have taken $100 worth of material, and with whatever time you've put into it, you've made the value less than zero, because you can't even give it away. It's like, would you like this? Oh, no, thank you, right? So your time is not worth nothing. It's worth less than nothing. Your time devalues what you had, which was $100 worth of materials at the beginning. But as you get better, you eventually reach the point where you can take those $100 of materials and you can turn that into a product that someone is willing to spend $100 for. Okay, congratulations. You now are not devaluing. Now your time is worth nothing, right? You can put your time in to take $100 worth of materials to create a painting and frame and all that together that someone's willing to pay $100. And then as you get better, you reach a point where it's like, wow, I can sell that now for $200. Well, now your time is worth something, right? If you were spending 8 hours on each of those paintings, you know, the initial one, you're saying your cost, you're basically, your time is worth negative $12 an hour, and then it becomes zero, and then it becomes, wow, your time is actually worth $12 an hour, because in 8 hours, you can increase the value of the raw materials to the finished product to, say, $100 or $96. And that's the thing. As we get better and better, our time becomes worth more. But I see it all kinds of people online going, this painting took me 30 hours. How much should I charge? How much is your time worth? And the public decides that, and they decide it on a track record. So there's no, I've seen artists say, well, you should be getting paid at least $30 an hour. It's like, why? Unless your work is really good, right? Should I get paid to go out and play mediocre golf? I don't think so. Should an artist get paid for producing mediocre art? I don't think so, because there's a million of them and they're all trying to sell their work. But the good news is, what your time eventually could be worth is an awful lot. I think it was 2 years ago, I did a painting on TikTok. It was only a 12 by 12. And I did it in less than an hour on TikTok. And then we auctioned it, we sold it there, and it went for $895. So it's like, wow, okay, now my time potentially is worth $800 an hour. But when I started out, it was worth nothing. And the way we make our time more valuable is by mastering the skills, by mastering the concepts, by spending time in process mode, really pushing our creativity to create that unique voice that also shows mastery, that people look at and just go, oh my God, I love it, I have to have it. Okay. Are different mediums worth more in more demand, such as oils, acrylics, watercolor, gouache, or is it more dependent on subject and skill? So I would say skill and desirability trumps everything. So that if someone sees a acrylic painting that they absolutely love and just, you know, they go home thinking about it, they're not going to buy an oil painting that's less desirable instead, right? So I would say between oil and acrylic, it's a toss-up. There are some collectors who just prefer oil because of the history, right? Acrylics have only been around like less than 100 years, whereas oils have been around literally for thousands of years, and there's the rich history of oils and all that. But I would say between oils and acrylic, it doesn't matter. It comes to the work. Watercolor, and I would say gouache, probably the same, is it's dependent, because here's what people don't like about watercolor if it's framed in the traditional way. They don't like the fact that it has glass in front of it, right? Because if you see an original watercolor, just when an artist has finished it, right, and you look at it, it's amazing. As soon as you put glass in front of it, that diminishes the experience because you get reflection from the glass. And that means, so when you're looking at it, you see the reflections of what's opposite it. It also limits where you can place it, right? You can't really put a watercolor opposite a window because all day long, all you're going to see when you look at it is the reflection of the window and what's outside. Now, you can get that non-reflective glass, but that kind of fuzzes edges a little bit. So again, it diminishes that ability to see the painting the way it actually is under the glass. The glass kind of gets in the way. That non-glare glass also is very expensive. The cost of framing the watercolors means you have to charge more for it to pay that cost. Also, it's very difficult to go very big in watercolor, right? Because like I do a lot of, I just had one sell earlier this year at Koyman Galleries. It was 5 feet by 6 feet. I can lift that canvas with one finger. If that was a watercolor, we need to put reinforcing bolts into the wall to hold a frame with a sheet of glass that size. And so also how are you going to ship that? So all of that kind of stuff comes into why it's a harder sell just because of the medium itself. Now you can get around that by doing what I mentioned early on. You can actually varnish your watercolors with a DMSA varnish made by Golden, and you can mount them onto a wooden panel. Now you've kind of removed that. You don't have something between the viewer and the glass. Also shipping, you can ship that because if you're shipping with glass, now you got to worry about the glass breaking, and the bigger the painting, the more likely that, that's going to happen. So you can get around that. And I would say the same sort of thing for gouache. But I made the switch initially from watercolor because when I was painting portraits in both oil and watercolor, but I was a much more accomplished watercolor painter and had won much more awards and everything else in watercolor than I had in any other medium. But when I started doing the festivals, I just realized what I just mentioned about watercolor, as well as the fact they don't travel very well. They're easily damaged. I the wind blow in and blow 3 canvases on the ground. I just pick them up, brush them off, and hang them back up. The watercolors, got to replace that frame. That glass is broken, whatever. So I would say that if it doesn't matter to you, then, oil is a little better. On the other hand, that artist I talked about, Candace Cobb, been painting for 2 years, made $50,000 last year. She paints in watercolor, right? So there are a lot of people who do like watercolor, but you just need to kind of remove those barriers. And then the work just has to be brilliant too. But I would say, and it depends. Candace is also selling her work almost exclusively at festivals, right? So she doesn't have to worry about shipping framed paintings. And she's doing her own prints, and so she's selling directly to people. And that's kind of easier with watercolor than if you're selling them online, and now you got to frame them with glass, and now you need to build like a cushion of styrofoam around them and package them, all that. And then if it's damaged, now you got to replace the frames, all that kind of stuff. But I will say that if you are brilliant at watercolor, then you can make a very, very good living at it. And there are people who are willing to pay. Some of my very good friends who are very successful artists paint in watercolor. So one other thing I will say just before that, when you're learning, watercolor is the best medium to paint in, I believe, for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's cheap, right? You can buy, a full sheet of watercolor paper, cut it into eighths, and then paint on the front and the back while you're learning. So you can get 16 paintings out of a $10 sheet of watercolor paper, and you get better off at the beginning. You get better faster by a function of how many paintings you do, not how long you spend painting. And the other thing about watercolor is it's very easy, simple to set up, right? When I was painting in watercolor, I had a 4 square feet section, 4 feet by 4 feet in the kitchen, and we had like an open concept at the back of our house. I just had a stand-up easel where I had a thing to mount the board with paper on, and I had a dresser that I had my palette on, paper towels and water, and I could paint in that 4 foot square area and I could just put my brush down when I was done and go deal with the kids because I was a primary caregiver to the two young boys at that time. Because that's the other thing when you're starting out, you want to be able to have a setup where you can just go and start painting and where you can finish and put the brush down. You don't want to have it where, we all typically start on the kitchen table, right? It takes you half an hour to get all your stuff out. And then your mom's telling you or your wife's telling you, listen, we got dinner. You got to put everything away. So watercolor is much easier to create a setup that you can use anywhere. And watercolor is one of the most difficult, challenging mediums. So if you master watercolor, everything else comes easy. When I left painting in watercolor to paint in oils and acrylics, when I decided, okay, I need a product that travels better, the fact that I had mastered watercolor made those mediums so much easier to use. So I would really recommend watercolor when you're learning and building skills. But at a certain point, if you want to maximize scales, you might want to think about switching mediums. But that's up to you. What about using AI images for your art sources instead of photos? Oh, that's a good one. We've dealt with that a few times with my hungry artists. So here's the problem with using AI images for your source photos. I'm sure you guys have all heard that a bunch of AI companies have been sued, right? Because the AI is just spitting out intellectual property that they're just slightly changing, but not enough, but it's a copyright infringement. So there is that possibility because the AI is drawing on all kinds of images in its bank to give you that image you're going to paint from. There's no guarantee that they're not breaching someone's copyright to do that. And if you do that, and if you get sued, the fact that you got it through ChatGPT or some other AI thing is not an excuse. It's like, yeah, okay, well, then you are culpable as well as the company that's taking intellectual property that they're not entitled to create the images. So that's the one thing. So it's no guarantee that you're not breaching an actual artist or photographer's copyright. The other thing is it comes down to your brand, right? That if it becomes known that you are just copying AI images with your paint, that's exactly the same as if it just becomes known that you are copying another photographer's work with your paint. As I mentioned before, with a certain amount of skills, like I could paint anything. You could, I've done extremely high realism portraits in watercolor and oil, which high realism watercolor portraits is about the toughest test of skill there is. You could show me anything and I could paint it. But the reason that my work has been so successful is there's that uniqueness of my voice that is coming out that is part of my brand. If I was just having AI create stuff and me paint it, not likely to happen. And even if you can fool people for a while, when and if it comes out, then your brand and the value of your work, I believe, will just tank. Now, is it possible to use AI in some part of the creative process where it's still uniquely you? Then I'd say maybe. I don't know, right? But what you don't want to be doing is just by rote copying an AI image. And I get why that's attractive because AI can do some pretty amazing things, right? It's like, oh wow, that's really nice. But at the end of the day, too, you always want to decide: are you interested in this for the long-term successful career where you are very well known, very successful, or do you want to go for the short-term quick sales now? And almost inevitably, whatever is going to be for the short-term quick sales now is going to hurt you in the long run. So I would say, yeah, I would, again, if you are going to use AI, but then there's a market change from what the AI came up with, where there's still something uniquely you that you created to make the image, then possibly. But I would just say, I know there is a real negative reaction to anything smacking of AI within the creative community. And I'm assuming that would be with buyers as well. So I would be very, very careful about that personally. How do you handle Personal information when starting up your own art business, especially with social media and YouTube. Have there ever been issues with using your real name versus a business name? That's a very, very good idea. Sorry, very good question. And yes, you do have to be cognizant of that. My situation was very, very different because when I started promoting my work on social media, I was in my 40s, I was 6'3" back then, 6'2" now, kind of jacked, ex-police officer. I wasn't worried about anybody knowing where I lived, right? When I mentored Brooke, young, attractive girl, um, who developed a very big social media very quickly, all kinds of issues and concerns about people being able to know, like, where she lives, what she's doing, all that kind of stuff, just because of the nature of the world we live in. So I would say that if you are not comfortable with people kind of knowing much about you, right? You can have a pen name, like Emily Valentine. That's not her legal name, right? Everybody knows her by Emily Valentine. I'm not going to tell you what her real name is because she doesn't want people to know. That's what she goes by. You can have a pen name just like a author does, right? If you're not comfortable with people being able to find you, actually who you are. And I would say in this day and age, for most people, yeah, it's definitely a concern. And I would say in particular for women, it's a much bigger concern than for men just because of the nature of the world we live in. And so there's nothing wrong with that. And you don't even need to, like, I'm very present on social media. My image kind of, when I used to advertise my open house on social media. Here's the address, everything else, I don't care. I want people to come. I'm not worried. I'm a big tough guy and I have my boys there helping me too, who are bigger and stronger than me. So it's like I'm not worried about someone knowing where I live any more than I would just than people coming to like an open house when we sold our house. But if you're not comfortable with that, then again, when it comes to an open house, you might not want to do that. But I should mention back to that too. So if you're not comfortable with that, definitely with your name, if you're not comfortable, create a pen name and just register your business under that, right? And if you're not comfortable with your image, there are artists online um, who are very, very big. What's the guy's name? Cameron Long? Is it Chris Long? I think it is. He's got an Instagram following that's huge. You never see his image; you just see his paintings. And so you don't need to have that. And then even if you're thinking about doing like the studio open house, and you're like, well, I don't want people knowing where I live. You have the option. There's a couple options there. You could rent a pop-up space, which is very different than a vanity gallery. Pop-up space is they're not telling you they're a fancy gallery that's going to promote your show. They're just renting you a space, and then you use your social media, whatever else it is, to bring people to that space, but it's not at your home. And then the other option is you may have a friend or family or a patron or someone who loves your work who is up to hosting like a studio open house. And then also, when I started with the studio open house, I was only inviting friends and family who I would invite to my house anyways. So those are all issues you need to concern. But I'm glad you brought that up. And what I would say, it depends on the degree to which you are comfortable with people knowing more about you or less. But definitely, it's something that you need to concern. What determines a great work? I love that. That's my favorite question. Depends which village you are in, right? What determines a great work in the Museum of Modern Art is very different than what determines a great work in the Village of Commercial Sales. And we get to judge work in the Village of Commercial Sales by one thing only, and that is the impact that it has on the people that see it. And what we want work to do is to stop people in their tracks, to take their breath away, to inspire that biblical emotion of coveting. And I think we all know that, right? If you're on this, you not only like to create art, you like looking at it. We all know when we've been to a show or been to a gallery and you see a piece and you just start salivating. It's like, oh my God, I would love to take this home. I would love to have this and walk into my living room every day and see that, right? That's what great art in this village does. And the more people that it has that impact on it, the more you can build a successful career on that. But that is the only thing that matters in this village. It doesn't matter what a critic says, doesn't matter what some university professor says, doesn't matter what anyone else says. It's like, what is the impact that it has on people who see it? And the more people that it has that impact on, then I say the greater the work in the village of commercial sales. And what I can tell you, what people value in the village of commercial sales is work that does all of those things. So it takes their breath away, inspires all of those kind of feelings and emotions. It also demonstrates mastery, and it needs to demonstrate mastery of skill, mastery of concept, ideally as well, a unique voice, again, which gets down to the scarcity of, like, if you love this artist's work, that's the only one doing it, right? You can have a work that does all of that same stuff, but if it looks like the art of 30 other artists who do similar work, then they're going to go with the one that's cheapest. And the reason it needs to inspire, it needs to also require mastery is because if you become successful, people will try to copy you. Now, I already talked about someone copying my work and I ended up suing them. It cost them a lot of money, but you can't copyright a style. So people can copy your style, which is why if you create work that does all of this stuff, but it doesn't require mastery. And a great example of that is fluid acrylic pours, right? You can take a weekend workshop on just pouring fluid acrylic and letting it kind of go together and then mushing it together on foil mat board. You can create some breathtaking stuff. I'm not denying that. But the problem is any idiot can learn how to do it in a weekend. So I remember one of my friends, she was a very accomplished watercolor painter, but she took one of these workshops with doing fluid acrylic pours. And that's exactly what it was. You pour the fluid acrylic on a piece of gold foil mat board. You kind of take another piece of gold foil mat board, you mush it together, you pull them apart. Some of them are breathtaking. And when you got good at it, you could compose there too and make them breathtaking. And she was selling these framed for like $50. She said, I pay my booth fee. But guess what happened? And she was selling a lot of them. But next thing you know, a month down the road, there's someone else doing the same thing, selling them for $30 a piece. Because if it's easily repeated, someone will copy you and someone will sell it for less, and then it becomes a race to the bottom. So if what you do can be copied by anyone, then they will. And so that's why it's important that the work not only have all of this stuff, but that it require mastery. And then ideally, if there's something unique about your work, I've had people reach out to me that say they were down visiting someone in Australia and they saw one of my paintings in their house. And they were like, oh my God, I was shocked, but I knew it was one of yours as soon as I saw it. And that's what you want, right? Where they can recognize as soon as they see it, they know who did it. But that's what a great work does in this village. But that has nothing to do what goes on in the other villages. That's why it's so important. As I said at the start, everything I talk about is about the idea of selling your work to real people who are going to take it home, hang it in their walls, hang it in their business. That's the village that I talk about, and that has nothing to do with postmodern art or anything else. Okay. So we're at 3 hours now. So as you guys can tell, I love talking about this stuff. Cameron was just in my ear saying, okay, we've got 3 questions left. And so we're going to call it there. So we got the 3 more questions. So that's probably going to take another half hour or so. So what's next, Cam? I'm a blacksmith and not forging sculptures yet. Would that sell, do you think, even if it is not within the village of realism, if it's more within the realm of the surreal aesthetics? That's a tough question, because at the end of the day, what I think doesn't matter. What matters is what people think. And so I can't tell you. I'm pretty good at art, at picking out, going, okay, I think that's got some legs. In terms of that, like, you will need to try that to see. But I will tell you one thing. There's a great book out there by Louis Lehrman, Lehrman, it says Becoming a Successful Artist. And he actually interviewed what he did. He was going to all these workshops at Scottsdale Artist School that were being taught. And in the Scottsdale Artist School, for any that don't know, if you live in the US and the Southwest in particular, the best artists in the world who are also teachers go there to teach. So if you're looking at how can I improve my skills and you have the ability to travel, then I would look at the schedule of the Scottsdale Artist School, because there you get people who, like me, who are very, very successful artists, but still really feel that desire to teach, but they like teaching in person. So they might teach 1 or 2 workshops there in a year, but they get the top painters in the world there. But anyways, what Louis Lehrman was doing, he was going to all these workshops and he was talking to all these instructors who were also successful artists. And so he thought, well, I'm going to interview all these artists and find out how they were able to go from just being one of the millions of kids who likes to draw or create to actually making a living from their art. And that's the book. He interviewed about 20 artists of varying degrees of success. And there was one artist in there that now was a painter, but when they started out, these were very bohemian people, and he'd gotten himself a welding torch, and he started playing around with doing sculptures using welding, which I'm assuming if you're a blacksmith, it's different but similar, right? And he's just started making these abstract sculptures and then going to festivals and exhibiting them. And he was able to quit his job, and him and his wife hopped in their Winnebago or their camper and just traveled around the world with him building these sculptures kind of at their campsite with his welding torch and then going to festivals and selling them. And then he ended up eventually going, well, I should investigate this painting thing too. So he got into painting. And again, my belief is you can learn anything. So he thought, well, let me see with painting. And he became a successful painter too, but he started off with that. So, but what I would say is like you have to test the market in any of these kind of things. The goal of being a creative, right? If that's kind of who we are, the goal is to play what Simon Sinek calls the infinite game. And that is you just want to be able to keep playing the game. And to do that, it means you should never take a risk that has the potential to take you right out of the game, right? So it's like, I'm not like, you wouldn't go, okay, I'm going to mortgage my house. I'm going to quit my job. I'm going to open a little studio and see if I can sell my ironworks, right? Because if that doesn't work out, not only do you not have a career that you had before, you also are losing your blacksmith studio and you're losing your house and you can't put food on the table. So the way to do it is always doing it in small increments and testing. And so what I would say to you is there are a lot of art festivals that would potentially take sculpture. And so the way to test this out is in a small way, right? It's like create your sculptures, test it out in something where it's like, okay, if you pay $100 or $200 to do a local art festival, and then you bring your work there and see what's the reaction. Because again, at the end of the day, what's important is not, so many artists get caught up in, oh, I love the work and I love the process. And it's like, that's not enough. There needs to be people that love the work that are willing to pay. But you don't need everybody. You just need a few, right? And the other thing I can tell you is that, you know, you may start out kind of small, right? With little sculptures or whatever. But you also want to look, would there potentially be a market here? Well, I would say that, you know, there are a lot of people who have very big fancy homes, who also have very big, expansive outdoor spaces that could potentially use a sculpture there. And so is there a market for that? Potentially. The other thing, this is also why we'll get into it a little bit later, because you're going to be thinking about the size and scale of your stuff. I would start off small just to see if there's an interest, but you can make an awful lot more money from big pieces, whether it's sculpture or whether it's painting, than you can from small pieces once you've identified and created a voice that people love. Because here's the other thing, like when you're doing small paintings, you're competing against all the other artists out there that are doing small paintings, which is every hobbyist right up to every pro, right? When you're doing medium-sized paintings, you're competing against the people who are a little more further along because the hobbyists aren't doing 3 foot by 4 foots or 30 by 40s because they don't want to risk on a canvas that expensive because they're not sure the work's going to turn out. So there's less people there in that kind of that you're competing against. But when you go really big, so for me, like I consider really big like 4 feet by 5 feet or 6 feet by 7 feet, that kind of thing. Those paintings make me an awful lot more money and they're an easier sale because two things. There's very few of the artists out there that are doing paintings that big. So the competition is much less. Not only that, big pieces, who wants big pieces? People with big walls, right? People with big walls, with big homes, have a bigger wallet. So they're more likely. So you're getting yourself into a rarefied atmosphere in terms of the competition, but you're already pre-selecting kind of people who have the wherewithal to pay because the only person who would want a big painting is someone with a big space, which means they must be reasonably successful. And I would say the same thing would apply to sculpture as well. But the only thing I would say is you need to test it. Test it out small in a way that whenever you go to try something, you always want to ask yourself, okay, is there a demand for this that people are actually willing to pay for, right? And so with your sculptures, that you kind of don't know. So you don't want to have a huge investment in time, materials, or effort, or whatever, only to find nobody likes your particular voice. So that's why I would start out kind of small. And then the other thing is like, if this doesn't work out and it fails and totally flops, am I going to be okay? And if the answer is yes, it's like, okay, well, then I'm willing to take this risk. And then the other thing is, do I love doing this? Because sometimes you could find something where you go, well, I think there's a real demand for this. And yeah, I can do it and it's not going to take me out of the thing. But if it ends up becoming something that you don't want to do, which was portraits for me. That was exact. You think, when could that happen? That was me. I'd built myself into a business where I was creating a product where I hated the process, right? So if you don't love the process, it doesn't matter how successful it is, there's easier ways to make a buck doing stuff you don't love. But that's what I would say. Just test it out small and who knows. But I would say, and the other thing I would do is do your research, right? Go online and just Google like, blacksmith artists or iron sculptures or whatever, and see what's out there. Because the one thing you want to know too is it's like, okay, if there are blacksmiths out there, and I'm willing to bet there probably are, who are just killing it, who are doing very, very well doing their sculptures, then my thing always is, well, if someone else can do it, I can do it, right? And so, but if there's no one out there, if there's no market for big sculptures made by blacksmiths, and it's like, well, maybe you'll be the first. But I don't think there is enough, and I've seen enough of this type of artwork in high-end homes in their gardens or public spaces or whatever. But I would say just start out small, but never take a risk that has the potential to take you out of the game. So you need to be good in terms of, if this fails, am I going to be good? Okay, because then I can get up and I can create more work tomorrow, right? Okay. I think I have to rewrite my question. How much chance do you think have new artists to build a living in 2026 with this hard economy days we are living in right now? Do you think it has an impact on art? Yes, it does. And I can tell you that whenever we are living in times of uncertainty, then that impacts luxury purchases, right? So that means that if people are uncertain about their job, about their economy, about paying their mortgage, about, is Trump going to invade half the world, right? When people are uncertain, they tend to kind of hedge their bets and kind of not spend money on luxury purchases. So definitely I have seen in the last couple of years, there's been a lot of uncertainty for a lot of reasons, whether it's just the economy or politics or whatever. And I've heard from artists that their sales have gone down in the last year or two over what they were kind of in the few years before. So that definitely impacts, but that impacts everything. But the other thing that I will tell you is, and this is also why I think it's really important to be part of that Pareto group, right? To be part of the group where, you know, you are at the top of your game commanding a big dollar ticket for your work, is there are also a lot of people who that doesn't impact at all, right? For the average person, kind of working class, that is kind of worried about making their payments, job security, all that kind of thing, yes, that impacts their luxury purchases. There are also a ton of people who have multi-million dollar net worth, billion dollar net worth, whatever. Those people aren't impacted by the economy. They see something they like, they just buy it. But they typically buy at the higher end, right? From artists who are more accomplished, have a bigger brand, have an experience, have that kind of history of having sold their work and sell at a high ticket, which is again why I really recommend, again, creating great work with a unique voice so you can get to the point where you're selling at that highest price. It's much more difficult when you're selling at that mid-level price because you've got so much more competition. And also when you're selling at that mid-level price, you are targeting kind of the average kind of middle class, if there's any such thing anymore, type of person. When you reach that kind of elite status, you're then targeting the people that have a lot of disposable wealth anytime. And so I would say, yes, it's going to be more difficult to break in now, but it's always going to be difficult. And the thing is, there are artists who are doing very well out there now. Like I say, one of my students, second year painting, she made over 50 grand last year. The thing is, becoming a successful artist, if that's your dream, it's a marathon, right? It's not like, wow, I'm saying that you can do all this stuff and by the end of this year, you're going to be making $30,000 a year. That's probably not going to happen for most people. It didn't happen for me. I mean, I was already an elected member of the Canadian Watercolor Society, senior signature member of the Canadian Institute of Portrait Artists. I'd probably been in a dozen international juried shows. I'd won a bunch of awards. It still took me in my sixth year till I made 30 grand. So it's not easy. So I'm not saying, oh, do this now and you're going to make this amount. For some people, it's going to happen. But what I can tell you is that if this is something you want more than anything else in the world, that if you are willing to work harder at this than anything you've ever done in your life, eventually you will get there. And it's kind of like, you know, when the economy is really tight and sales are slow, it's kind of like, well, yeah, then it's like, you know, you're working your other job to pay the bills, but you're doing it. But the whole thing is you need to start. And you need to progress because what's going to happen is in 3 or 4 years, or maybe next year, the economy is going to turn around and it's going to be a boom. And the question is, are you going to be ready for it? Or are you still not having started because you're afraid because it's like, well, the economy's not that good. I'm not going to make that much money this year. It's like, yeah, you might not, right? But the whole idea is until you get to that point where you're creating the work that people love, you're never going to have a career anyways. And you don't get to that point usually within a year. It takes several years. Like I say, it took me many years. Hopefully by using the stuff that I learned in the book, you'll get there quicker. But you don't want to not start now and wait until the economy's good, because when the economy's good, there's going to be people out there who are ahead of you because they started now. And so that's what I would do. And you can't predict it either. I thought COVID would really hurt sales, right? We had banner year during COVID. And when you look back, I realize why, right? A lot of people so we had all of this uncertainty. So for a lot of people, they were not spending money on luxury goods. But then there were those people who had secure jobs, right? Who had government jobs or other jobs they could do from home. And so what were they doing? A lot of them were actually working overtime. They were making more money than ever. They couldn't go on vacation. They couldn't go out for dinner. They didn't have to buy clothes to go to work. They didn't have to drive to work. They didn't have to take the GO train to work or whatever. And they were nesting, right? Because they were spending a lot more time at home, they were spending a lot of money on making their home more beautiful. So we made out like bandits during COVID with our online sales because the people that had money, that had jobs, had more money, very few things to spend it on, and one of them was their house. So you can't even predict this. I would just say that, there's The most important thing is to start. And again, just make sure you're taking smart risks that are not going to put your rent or mortgage money in jeopardy or whatever, right? You're risking money and time and effort that you have the ability to be a write-off, and you're still going to be okay. Okay, must portrait artists approach marketing differently? I can't imagine clients buying a painting of someone they don't know unless the style exceeds the subject matter. Yeah, that's actually that's a good question. So I have some experience with that, right? So I started off painting people because, again, I'm an ex-fraud investigator. I'm a very analytical guy. When I decided that it was important for me to get back into my painting again, I was in my mid 30s, and I just realized that I'm an artist, but I'm not painting. This all came about because a good friend of mine, a police officer, was murdered on the job. And I just realized, he had all these things he was planning on doing that he's not going to get to. And for me, I was planning on getting back to art when I retired 20 years down the road. And I just realized there's no guarantee of that. I'm an artist who's not painting. If that was me, who people were going to the funeral, no one would even talking about the fact that I was an artist because I wasn't practicing. I wasn't doing anything. So that made me kind of think I need to get back because that's who I am, right? That was a big part of who I was growing up, and that was my dream up until 21 when I said I'm not talented enough and joined the police force. But then I thought, okay, well, I'm going to get started in art. What should I do? And so, anyways, I started subscribing to all these different art magazines and reading books, and everything said you should paint what you love. Well, I was a father with two young boys that were at the time, I think they were very young. And I thought, well, I'm going to start painting pictures of my boys. So I just started taking photos of my boys and painting pictures of them. But taking pictures that were not like studio portraits of the cutesy thing, but things where the lighting was very dramatic or interesting, but where I thought it just really, it was something I wanted to paint. And surprisingly, people bought those paintings of my boys. So there's a difference between portrait painter and figurative painter, right? There are a number of figurative painters out there who hire models, take pictures of the models, and do their paintings, but where their work is at an extremely high level, but also where it has a unique voice, where as soon as you see it, you know you did it. Lu Kong is an example of that. I think it's Lu, and I think the last name is Cuong. He or she, I'm not sure, does figurative works that as soon as you see it, you know who did it, and sells very, very well. But what happened with me is I started doing paintings, a lot of paintings of my boys, and my wife's like, we got enough paintings of the boys, and then I started taking pictures of friends whenever we were out at a pool party or wherever out hiking. I would just say, hey, can I take pictures? And I just looked for images that I thought were really interesting, right? Taking a photo where it's like I'd like to paint that. And then when I started having my studio open houses, I've just let people know, oh, I've got a portrait of your husband there too, if you guys are interested. And of course, most of them people ended up buying. And then I started doing commissioned portraits. And that's a very different thing. So I think that's what you're talking about. And yes, kind of that whole thing is very different because now you're doing a painting for a specific person to fill a specific need. You're trying to paint their person in the way that they want them painted. And so for me, I found that that was just not satisfying creatively. There are a number of portrait artists out there doing incredibly well. If I had loved doing that, I could have made an awful lot more money than I already have, because it's the same sort of thing that we talked about the big houses. Guess what? Rich people, what do they love most? Their kids, their wife, their mom, their dad. Senators, judges, congressmen, they all want their portrait painted. And so there's a very, very lucrative business out there of painting portraits, especially in the US, especially in the southern US. But yeah, the way you market that then is, well, if you're interested in doing portraits, what I initially did, I would just paint pictures of people and then let them know I had a painting of them. And then as people started wanting paintings of people, I would just do it on spec. I would just say, okay, well, yeah, I'll come over, I'll shoot the photos, I'll do a painting of your dad. If you like it, you buy it. And if you don't like it, you don't buy it. Now, a lot of people might think that's crazy, but what that did is it got my name out there a lot, and it also got me good at understanding what I needed to do to satisfy people. I only ever had, I think, 3 portraits out of probably 150 where the person said, I don't like it. But I learned from each of them, and I learned that it was a mistake that I made in the process. It's like, well, I'm not doing that again. And then it got to the point, if it's something you want to do kind of going forward seriously, where you're actually charging big bucks, then there's often a schedule where, so basically you are promoting yourself as a service to capture an image of someone. For sometimes it's just for a loved one. Sometimes it's, hey, they've been elected to Congress, they've been made a judge, they whatever. And then in that case, usually like there'll be a meeting, which is free, where you talk about the concept for the painting. You outline the different pricing structures, because different prices for different sizes. Also, it might be like, like for me, for example, it was X number of dollars for a 24 by 30 portrait of a person. But if you want to add another person, it's X number of dollars more for each additional person in there, because that takes a lot longer. And then what would happen is, if they agreed to it, then when I came and did the photo shoot, and then we looked at the photos and then came up with a final concept, then there would be a deposit. And at that point, at the photo shoot, it would usually be about 25%. And then when you're laying out the portrait, when you've got it kind of blocked in the underpainting, etc., there, or drawn in on the canvas, whatever the case may be, and ready to go, and you get approval from the client, there'd be another 25%. And then the other 50% would come upon approval of the painting. And ideally, if you've done all the work leading up to it so that you know what that client is expected, they're going to be happy, and there'll be tears. There'll be good tears. People often cried. That's the one thing I did love about doing the portraits. I had all kinds of people cry in a good way when they saw the painting of their daughter, their wife, their father, whatever. If they like the painting and they will take it, then they pay you the extra 50. If they go no for whatever reason, well, then you have the option: is there anything I can do to make it acceptable? Or it's like, okay, and you walk away, you take the 50%, but you keep the painting. Because the whole thing with the portrait painting is, you're right. If you're doing a portrait of someone, if that's the purpose, is to please the client, it's very unlikely you're creating a piece of art that someone else is likely to buy just because it's a beautiful figurative piece. And that's why you have that kind of stage of them putting it up, because if they don't want it, it's not likely anyone else is going to want to buy a picture of these 2 kids with their one-eyed dog, which is a painting that I have still here at the house. So yes, very different. And there are portraits. If you are interested in portraits, there are portrait societies. And that's the best thing to do, is investigate that. And then there's a lot of kind of information there, and even like where you can join as an associate member or whatever, but you'll be getting information from people who are at the top of the game painting portraits. So hope that answered your question. Okay, last question. Oh, this is a good one. What about using the image of famous people as art sources? I've seen a lot of people do that, like Marilyn Monroe. Illegal, copyright infringement, right? People have the right of publicity of their image, right? So you aren't allowed to do a painting of Madonna or Marilyn Monroe and sell it. You're not. It's a very different thing than copyright. It's called the right of publicity. You need to have the person's written permission to be able to do it, right? And if you don't, it's a different law, but it's very similar to copyright. It's called right of publicity. That's why you can't do paintings of famous athletes, right, and sell them, because the person's buying that painting not because you are an amazing artist. It's because they're a huge fan of Tiger Wood or whoever, right? Or the Rolling Stones or whatever. Now you will see people out there doing it. I remember going to a festival, and there's this one guy who was actually a pretty good painter, and all of his paintings were just copies of famous photographs from the rock and roll. And it's like, well, he's doing it. It's like, yeah, he is, and he's breaking the law. And if the people who have the rights to those images find him and sue him, they could come after. And here's what can happen with that. They can come out after you for compensatory damages, which means, say someone, and this guy was doing pretty well. So I would say he was probably making $30,000 or $40,000 a year doing paintings of the Rolling Stones. If he'd done that for 10 years, and then someone who's in charge of protecting the Rolling Stones brand sees this, does the research, figures out that this person has made $300,000 off Rolling Stone memorabilia, they can sue him for the $300,000 for compensatory damages. And that means that people who bought his paintings did that instead of buying real authorized Rolling Stone memorabilia. And so they go after him for the compensatory damage to show that's how much him doing that has hurt their ability to earn. But then they can also go after you for punitive damages, to say for encourage les autres, right? So you go at, if that happens, you're looking at potentially all the money that you've made from that stuff. Not only that, they can actually force you to divulge where you've sold that to, where they can go seize that work and destroy it. They can destroy all the work that you currently have. You're also responsible for paying the legal bills of the people who sued you, and they can sue you. They can assess punitive damages, which is just like, this was so egregious, like we have to slap even more money on it. So it's like, no, you're not allowed to do it. It's exactly the same as if you copied one of my paintings, as if you copied a photograph from another artist. People always bring up examples. Well, so-and-so's doing it. Yeah, well, they just haven't been caught. But if you get caught, prepare for your world to be a nightmare. Financially, it could ruin you. But not only that, it would really hurt your career. And there's a huge, everybody probably knows, whether you know the story or not, right? The artist that did the image of Barack Obama with the Hope, his last name's Ferry. Can't remember the first name. Young guy, pop artist. He got sued because that image of Barack Obama was from a newspaper, from the Associated Press, an artist that was posted in the newspaper, and he took this image of Barack Obama and used that to create that image of Hope. And got sued, and they just recently settled out of court for an undisclosed agreement. Because the other thing, here's the last thing I'm going to touch on. This probably, if the last thing you hear, this is good too. And he changed it, right? So this was a black and white photo, and he just made it graphic, like silkscreen. But it was so specific, the lighting and the pose, that they were able to prove that he took that from this black and white image of Barack Obama. Because people will say, oh, yeah, but as long as you change it a little bit, it's okay. It's like, no, it's not. You need to change it enough so that a judge or a jury would say this is a creative piece of work all on its own that does not rely on this initial thing that it's derived from. And so I've heard people say, oh, if you just flip it from left to right, or as long as you change 20% of it, or, change the tree to a rock or whatever. No, there is no set formula about how much you have to diverge from the original until you are safe in terms of being sued. And you're never safe in terms of being sued. You could use it only for a little bit. Anyone can still sue you. And then even if you win and are not found guilty of copyright violation, you still have to pay your lawyer. But if the final determination about how close is this to the original, is it too close and does it breach copyright? It depends on what that particular judge or that particular jury decides on that day based on the merits of the case. So there is no safe way to copy another artist's paintings, photographs, or use their image without being sued. The only way that it's safe is if you're just doing it under the fair usage, right? You're just doing it for fun. You're giving it to your mom. You're giving it to your friends. You're giving it to your brother. You're just hanging it in your house. Soon as you start exhibiting that work in public and or start selling it, now potentially you are breaching the copyright and rights of publicity laws, and the potential is really, really bad. So again, just into that whole sort of thing before, whenever something looks good, in terms of a short-term thing, but you think, oh, I'm not sure if this is really ethical or, I'd say don't do it, because you're having that feeling. If you have to ask the question, you probably know the answer, right? So that's why I say, like, work exclusively once you get to the point where you are thinking about starting to sell your work. Then work exclusively from your own source material, your own sketches, your own photos, whatever. Doesn't mean you can't copy other artists' work along the process, right? Copying other artists' work is still a valid and well-respected way of learning. You go to the Louvre, you'll see art students in there copying other artists' work, but that's because they're doing it for a learning purpose and it's not for commercial purpose. So when you're copying another artist's work, it's okay, just as long as you don't then go and claim that work as your own, even just posting it on social media or trying to sell it. And I will just say one other thing too, that there is a limit on this, right? There is such a thing as public domain, and that's typically 75 years after the creator has died. At least here in Canada and the US, I believe it's 75 years. So that means basically, if I die next year, 76 years from then, my work's fair game. People can copy my work and sell it. But if they do it before then my kids or my grandkids are likely going to be suing you. So it's just better off not to. And here's the other thing too, because people go, well, I'm going to then copy this Rembrandt. Well, it then gets into the whole question of, well, where'd that image of the Rembrandt come? Because if it comes from a photograph that was taken in the gallery by a particular artist for this art book, that photographer has copyright for that photograph until 75 years after his death. You could be done for the breach of the photograph of that particular painting. It's just, again, copying is fine as a learning exercise. I actually encourage it. That's why I teach courses and have my online things where people just follow along with me, but it's just for learning. But as soon as you're going to make that kind of step from a hobbyist to where now I'm actually going to start to exhibit my work and sell my work, no copying, no using other people's images. If you want, here's one last thing too. Even if you are just taking pictures of someone and like they agree, like when I used to take pictures of people to do a painting, for example, and then I would sell that painting and they're okay with that. But if I wanted to do prints of that, even though they're just Joe Schmo who nobody knows, I would need their permission, because they didn't give me permission to take a picture of them and then do prints of that image. And that's why and the only reason I mention that is often people go out, if you're doing pictures of people, you're going to do paintings of people, often people will go out to these places to take photos, right? And I know there's one artist in the States and he does a lot of Civil War paintings, brilliant artist, but a lot of his paintings are of like Civil War veterans motifs and that, and he goes to these reenactment ceremonies and he takes all kinds of photos. But what he has is a photographer's release. And you can just Google this and ask ChatGPT to write up a photographer's release. It basically just has the person's contact information. And it just says that they are giving you permission to take a photograph of them and to use that photograph to create a painting. And you may even put in there and or prints. And if they sign that, you're good. If they don't sign that, then they have the ability to challenge your right to actually do a painting of them. And that's why you'll see that anywhere where you go with photographers, always sign a release. And if you're hiring a model, get the model to sign the release as well, so that you have full copyright over the stuff, that they don't have right of publicity of their image. Okay, it has been a lot of fun. We are at 3 hours and 30 minutes. I hope you guys have found this valuable. If you haven't bought my book, I'd appreciate it if you buy the book, but you don't have to. And also, if you are interested in kind of dealing with me in a more kind of involved way, then again, I have a number of courses on my online art academy where it's just, you download it and you get the courses. And then we also have the Hungry Artist Community, which is a annual subscription, and that's $449 a year Canadian, where you get all my courses and all my upcoming courses. But the big thing there is you get access to me on a weekly basis. And then we also have a private Facebook group there of all the other artists that are kind of on that journey. Thank you, Cameron. So yeah, you can learn more about the Art Academy there. And for any of you, if you just came on later, if you do buy the book and you want to claim the bonuses, so until So we're still in the middle of launch week until Sunday at midnight. When you buy the book, you also get access to some incredible bonuses. So you get my online course, Creating a Plan for Your Success. And that walks you through that whole thing of how you go from a beginning artist, what are the things you should be focusing on first, right up until you start selling, and then how you end up scaling your earnings and all that kinds of thing. It also comes with some worksheets that will guide you through the process of, for each year, identifying what are the big dominoes that you want to knock over, and then creating goals and objectives so you have a plan to achieve those. You'll also get the one live Zoom call with me, another one, but that will be on Zoom, so you'll be able to actually share your work and I can give you critiques. And the way that you access that is if you buy the book by Sunday, there's a bonuses page at the back, and that will have a link that you can type into your computer, type that URL in, and that'll take you to the bonus page where you can claim those for free. On Monday, we are changing that link in the book and changing what it says about the bonuses. So people who buy the book after Monday, they won't have the access to that URL. And if you do buy the book, we're going to leave that landing page open to claim the bonuses until February 7th. So even if you buy the book on the last day, this Sunday is the last day of the bonuses. Even if you buy the book, then you'll have the URL for the bonuses, but you'll still have a couple weeks to go and claim it. But then once February 7th comes, we're just actually shutting down that landing page and you won't have access to those bonuses anymore. Okay. And I think on that note, we will call it. So Cameron, is there anything else that I need to mention before? Yeah, so the book, to buy the book, you have to buy that on Amazon. So you just need to go to Amazon.ca, UK, US, wherever you are, and just search "You Can Sell Your Art" by Tim Packer, and the book will come up. My Art Academy is a very separate thing. That's my online courses. Now, if you accept if you want to get the bonuses, you will do that through the URL that you'll see in the back of the book. That will take you to a landing page within my Art Academy, and you'll be able to set up an account for free there. You just need your name and your email, and that will set up an account on the Academy where you'll get free access to the online course, and then you'll also receive an email to invite you to the live Zoom call. But yeah, the Amazon has nothing to do with my Art Academy. That's why we've actually just published the link in the back of the book. So you can't go from Amazon and claim any of these bonuses. You just get the bonuses because you've got the URL at the back of the book on the bonuses page. It's pretty clearly laid out. You just go there, and if you buy the book by Sunday, you'll need to claim the bonuses by February 7th, because after February 7th, we're actually shutting down that landing page and it won't be available anymore. Is there anything else, Cam? Okay, so thank you, everybody. Cam, you can stop the live broadcast now, but I'm going to stay on. I think I have to stay on while it uploads my video. So you can shut the live broadcast now, and then you can come back on.